Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Rebecca Ashford, but everyone calls me Becca. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened in Deep Creek Hollow back in 1976. I've kept quiet for almost 50 years now, but I'm getting old, and the nightmares won't stop. I was 28 then, working as a freelance journalist out of Charleston. Not the glamorous kind you see in movies. I wrote about local festivals and missing pets mostly. But I had bigger dreams. I wanted to write something important, something that would get me noticed by the big newspapers. That's how I ended up chasing stories about people disappearing in the West Virginia mountains. Every few years, hikers would vanish without a trace. No bodies, no clues, just empty tents and cold campfires. The local papers barely mentioned it, but I thought there might be a pattern. Maybe a serial killer or some kind of cult. I figured I could write a book about it. What I didn't tell my editor was that this wasn't just another story for me. My sister, Sarah, had disappeared in those same mountains 10 years earlier. She was 21, in her last year at WVU. She'd gone camping with friends in October 1966, somewhere near Deep Creek Hollow. The search teams found her tent and sleeping bag, but Sarah was gone. Her friends said she'd walked into the woods to use the bathroom and never came back. The police said she probably fell into a cave or got lost. Case closed. But I knew Sarah better than anyone. She was careful, smart, and she knew those mountains. She wouldn't just wander off and die. So when I heard about more disappearances in the same area, I packed my camera and notebook and drove to Millfield, West Virginia. It's a tiny town about 40 miles from the nearest highway, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and strangers stick out like sore thumbs. I checked into the only motel in town. 6 rooms and a vending machine that ate your quarters. The lady at the desk looked me up and down like I was carrying a disease. "What brings you to Millfield, honey?" she asked, not sounding friendly at all. "I'm a journalist, writing about the local area, maybe some of the history." Her face went pale. "You're not here about them missing folks, are you?" "Well, Listen here, girl. You seem nice enough, but you best turn around and go home. Nothing good ever comes from poking around in business that ain't yours." She handed me a rusty key and wouldn't meet my eyes. "Room 4, checkout's at 10. That night, I spread Sarah's things across the motel bed. I'd kept everything the police returned to our parents, her journal, her camera, even her favorite hiking boots. I'd read her journal 100 times, but I opened it again, looking for clues I might have missed. Most of it was normal college stuff, complaining about professors, talking about boys, describing the beautiful fall colors in the mountains. But the last few entries were different. Her handwriting got messier, more urgent. October 18th. Something's wrong with this place. The birds stopped singing yesterday. Haven't seen a single squirrel or chipmunk. Even the bugs are gone. Jenny says I'm being paranoid, but I can feel it watching us. October 19th. Found tracks near our camp this morning. Too big for a bear, wrong shape for a person. Mike thinks it's just a prank, but who would be way out here? The tracks led toward that big cave we saw yesterday. I don't want to go near it anymore. October 20th. Can't sleep. Keep hearing voices calling my name from the woods. Sounds like Mom sometimes like Becca. But they're camping 40 miles away. I know it's not really them, but God help me, I want to follow the voices so bad it hurts. That was the last entry. The next day, she was gone. I closed the journal and tried to sleep, but every little sound made me jump. Around midnight, I heard something scratching at my door. Soft at first, then harder, like fingernails on wood. I lay in bed, heart pounding, until it finally stopped. The next morning, I asked the motel lady about hiring a guide to take me into the mountains. "Honey, please," she said, "just go home. Write about something else. Anything else." I have to do this, I said. It's about my sister. She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. You want Ezra Blackthorne. Lives in the old cabin past the gas station. But don't say I didn't warn you. I found Ezra chopping wood behind a rundown cabin surrounded by rusty car parts and empty beer bottles. He was older than I expected, maybe 70, with wild gray hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in months. But his eyes were sharp and clear. You're the reporter girl, he said without looking up from his axe. How did you... Small town. Word gets around. He split another log clean in two. Come to ask about Deep Creek Hollow, I bet. You know it? Ezra set down his axe and looked at me properly for the first time. Know it better than anyone alive, I reckon. Question is, why you want to go there? I told him about Sarah, about the other disappearances, about needing to know the truth. He listened without interrupting, but I could see him getting more and more uncomfortable. Girl, he said finally, some places are meant to be left alone. Deep Creek Hollow is one of them. But you'll take me? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he nodded slowly. I'll take you. But we do this my way, and when I say we leave, we leave. No arguments. I agreed, though I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Be ready at dawn, Ezra said, and bring everything you might need to survive. Once we go down into that hollow, ain't no telling when we'll be coming back up. We left Millfield just as the sun came up, driving Ezra's beat-up pickup truck down dirt roads that got narrower and rougher with every kilo. I'd brought my camera, plenty of film, a tape recorder, and enough food for 3 days. Ezra had a hunting rifle, a big knife, and a backpack full of things he wouldn't let me see. Tell me about the hollow, I said, as we bounced along a barely visible trail. Cherokee used to call it Invi Atsila, Ezra said, means the hungry one. They wouldn't hunt there, wouldn't even walk through it. Said something lived down in the caves that was always starving, always wanting more. What kind of something? Ezra was quiet for a while. The kind that ain't got a name in English. We parked at the end of the road where an old wooden sign read, Danger, Abandoned Mine Workings, Keep Out. Beyond it, the land dropped away into a deep gorge, thick with fog. Deep Creek Hollow, Ezra said. 500 feet down to the bottom, maybe deeper in some places. Used to be a coal mine down there in the 20s, before the accident. What accident? Cave-in killed 37 men, but that ain't the strange part. He shouldered his pack and started walking toward the cliff edge. Strange part is, they only found 20 bodies. The trail down into the hollow was steep and treacherous, carved into the limestone by generations of Cherokee, and later by coal miners. Every step made loose rocks skitter into the darkness below. The fog got thicker as we descended, until I could barely see Ezra walking ahead of me. Stay close, he called back. Easy to get turned around in this soup. Halfway down, I noticed something odd. My watch had stopped working. I tapped the face, wound it up, but the hands wouldn't move. Ezra, I said. My watch. Don't worry about it. Time gets funny down here. I was about to ask what he meant when I heard it. A sound like water dripping, but too regular, too musical. Like someone tapping out a rhythm on stone. You hear that? I whispered. Ezra stopped, walking. The dripping sound got louder, more complex, like a whole orchestra of drops in perfect harmony. Hear what? Ezra said, but his face had gone white. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. We stood there in the thick fog, listening to nothing but our own breathing. Let's keep moving, Ezra said. The bottom of the hollow was worse than I'd imagined. The fog was so thick I could barely see my own hands, and the ground was soft and spongy like walking on a wet mattress. Twisted trees reached up through the mist like gnarled fingers, their branches bare and black. This way, Ezra said, leading me toward what looked like a wall of solid rock. As we got closer, I realized it wasn't solid at all. It was the mouth of a cave, maybe 20 feet wide and so dark I couldn't see the back of it. The old mine entrance, Ezra explained. Most of the tunnels collapsed, but some still go back pretty far. I took out my camera and snapped a few pictures, but even with the flash, the cave mouth seemed to swallow the light. On the developed photos later, it would look like a black hole in the world. My sister camped somewhere around here, I said, checking the compass. The needle spun wildly, never settling on any direction. Compass won't work down here either, Ezra said. Too much iron in the rock. We found the campsite about 100 yards from the cave. At first I thought we'd gotten lucky. There was still a tent there, still some camping gear scattered around a cold fire pit. Then I looked closer. The tent was Sarah's. I recognized the blue nylon, the little patch she'd sewn on after tearing it on a tree branch. Her sleeping bag was rolled up neat and tidy beside it. Her camp stove sat ready to use, a can of beans opened beside it. "This is impossible," I whispered. I walked around the campsite in a daze. Everything was exactly like the police photos from 10 years ago, but it looked fresh. The tent fabric wasn't faded or torn. The food wasn't spoiled. Even Sarah's toothbrush was there, still damp. "Ezra," I said, "this has been here for in years. How is it still?" When I turned around, Ezra was backing away from the campsite, his face twisted with fear. "We need to leave," he said, "right now. But we just got here. I need to—" "Girl, listen to me." His voice was shaking. "I've lived in these mountains my whole life. I know things that would turn your hair white. And I'm telling you, we need to get out of this hollow before dark." I looked at my watch again, forgetting it had stopped. The fog was getting thicker, and I couldn't tell if the light was fading or if the mist was just blocking more sun. 1 hour, I said. "Let me look around for 1 hour, then we'll go." Ezra shook his head but didn't try to stop me. I started taking pictures of everything: the tent, the sleeping bag, the camp stove. Through my camera lens, I noticed something I'd missed before. There were other things scattered around the campsite, newer things: a plastic water bottle with a 1975 date stamp, a candy bar wrapper that hadn't existed in 1966, a pair of hiking boots that looked like they'd been bought last week. "Ezra," I called, "come look at this." But when I turned around, Ezra was gone. I called his name, but my voice seemed to get swallowed up by the fog. I couldn't even hear an echo. I ran to where I thought he'd been standing, but there was nothing there except more of that soft, spongy ground. That's when I heard the voice. "Becca?" I spun around. It sounded like Sarah, exactly like Sarah, but older somehow, sadder. "Sarah?" I whispered. "Becca, where are you? I can't find you." The voice was coming from the direction of the cave. I took a step toward it, then stopped. Something was wrong. Sarah had never called me Becca when we were alone. She always called me Becky. "I'm here, Sarah," I said, not moving any closer to the cave. "Where are you?" "I'm lost, Becky. I've been lost for so long. Please help me, now that we—" Voice used the right name, but it was too late. I'd already figured out this wasn't really my sister, but God help me, it sounded so much like her that part of me wanted to believe it. "Anyway, I'm scared, Becky. It's so dark down here. Please come find me." I backed away from the cave, fumbling for my camera. If this thing, whatever it was, could copy Sarah's voice, maybe I could get proof. I raised the camera and pointed it toward the cave mouth. Through the viewfinder, I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was a figure standing just inside the cave entrance. It had Sarah's height, Sarah's long blonde hair, even her favorite green jacket. But its proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the legs bent backward at the knees. And when it turned toward me, I saw that where its face should be, there was nothing but smooth, pale skin. I pressed the shutter, and the flash went off. For just a second, the whole cave mouth lit up bright as day. The thing that looked like Sarah let out a sound like steam escaping from a kettle and disappeared deeper into the cave. That's when I ran. I didn't think about Ezra, didn't think about my equipment. I just ran through the fog, stumbling over roots and rocks, trying to find the trail back up to the rim of the hollow. But every path I took led me back to the campsite. No matter which direction I went, I always ended up looking at Sarah's tent and that terrible black cave mouth beyond it. I was trapped. I must have spent hours running through that fog, trying to find a way out. My clothes were soaked with sweat and mist, and my hands were cut up from falling on sharp rocks. But no matter which way I went, I kept coming back to the same place. The campsite, the cave, that thing pretending to be my sister. Finally, I gave up trying to escape and sat down beside Sarah's tent. I needed to think, to figure out what was happening to me. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe the stress of looking for Sarah all these years had finally snapped my mind. But the camping gear felt real enough when I touched it. The tent was solid. The sleeping bag still smelled like Sarah's perfume. I unzipped the tent and crawled inside, hoping to find some clue about what had happened to her. Inside was Sarah's diary, not the one the police had given back to our parents, but a different one I'd never seen before. This one had entries that went past October 20th, 1966. Impossible entries. October 21st. Something took Mike and Jenny in the night. I heard them screaming, but when I got out of the tent, they were gone. Just their sleeping bags, still warm. I should leave, but I can't find the way out. Every trail leads back here. October 25th. Still trapped. The thing in the cave keeps calling to me in Mom's voice, in Becca's voice, in my own voice. I'm so hungry, but I'm afraid to eat the food. What if it's not really food at all? November 3rd. Ezra found me today. At least I think it was Ezra. He looked younger than he should, but he knew things only Ezra would know. He says he can help me, but I have to do exactly what he tells me. I'm so tired of being alone. The handwriting was definitely Sarah's, but the dates made no sense. If she'd written these entries, she should have died of thirst and exposure weeks ago. I flipped to the last entry, dated just 3 days ago. October 18th, 1976. Another one coming down into the hollow. A woman with a camera asking about the missing people. She looks like Becca, but older. God, has it really been 10 years? Ezra says we need to feed it again soon, or it'll start taking people from the town. I don't want to do this anymore, but what choice do I have? My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the diary. This was impossible. Sarah couldn't have been living down here for 10 years. She couldn't have aged only a few months in all that time. And she couldn't have known I was coming. Unless... Hello, Becky. I spun around. Sarah was standing outside the tent, backlit by the gray fog. She looked exactly the same as the day she disappeared, 21 years old, blonde hair in a ponytail, wearing that green jacket I'd seen on the thing in the cave, but this time, the proportions were right. This time, she had a face. Sarah? I crawled out of the tent slowly, afraid she might disappear if I moved too fast. I've missed you so much, she said. Her voice was exactly right, down to the little catch she always got when she was trying not to cry. I wanted to run to her, to hug her, to tell her I'd never stopped looking for her. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way she stood so perfectly still, like she was waiting for me to make the first move. Where have you been? I asked. Here. Always here. She gestured toward the cave. It won't let me leave, Becky. I've tried so many times, but the paths always lead back. What won't let you leave? Sarah's smile flickered for just a second like a TV with bad reception. The hungry one. The thing that lives in the deep caves. It's been here since before the Cherokee, since before anyone. It's so old, Becky. Older than the mountains. That's impossible. Is it? She took a step closer. You've seen the campsite. You've heard the voices. You know your compass doesn't work down here, that time moves differently. This place isn't like the rest of the world. I backed away from her, toward the cave entrance. Wrong direction, I realized too late. How have you survived down here for 10 years? I asked. The same way you will. Sarah's face changed, became somehow less human. It doesn't need to kill us, Becky. It just needs to feed. And there are always more people coming to the mountains, always more hikers and campers and curious journalists. You're saying you've been... I couldn't finish the sentence. Helping it hunt, leading people into the caves where it can reach them. It's not so bad, really. The hunger stops hurting after a while, and we get to stay together forever, all of us who feed it. That's when I saw the monsieur figures moving in the fog around the campsite, getting closer. Men and women of all ages, all wearing the same blank expression as Sarah. Some were dressed like hikers from different decades. Others wore the canvas work clothes of coal miners. The miners who died in the cave-in, I whispered. The ones who were chosen, Sarah corrected. Just like Mike and Jenny were chosen. Just like you're going to be chosen. I turned and ran toward the cave, thinking maybe I could hide in the tunnels until I figured out a way to escape. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The cave was much bigger inside than it looked from the outside. The walls curved away into darkness, and I could hear water dripping somewhere far below. But worst of all, I could feel something watching me, something huge and patient and incredibly, impossibly hungry. A sound echoed up from the depths, not quite a roar, not quite a whistle, but something that made every bone in my body vibrate. I tried to run back outside, but the cave entrance was gone. Instead of fog and gray daylight, there was only more tunnel stretching in every direction. I was in a maze now, limestone passages that branched and twisted with no logic I could understand. Some tunnels sloped down toward that terrible sound. Others seemed to climb upward, but when I followed them, they always curved back down again. I tried using my camera flash to see better, but the tunnels seemed to absorb light. Each flash showed me less than the last, until finally the bulb just went dark and wouldn't work at all. That's when I heard Ezra's voice calling my name. "Becca, where are you, girl? I've been looking all over for you." I followed the sound through the twisting passages, desperate to find another human being, even though part of me wondered if this was just another trick. I found him in a wide chamber, filled with old mining equipment, rusty picks and shovels, wooden support beams, even an overturned minecart. Ezra was sitting on a fallen beam, looking exactly the same as he had that morning. But something was different about his eyes. "Thank God," I said. "I thought I was going crazy. Sarah's down here, Ezra. She's alive, but something's wrong with her. Something's wrong with this whole place." Ezra nodded sadly. "I know, girl. I've known for years." "Then why did you bring me down here?" "Because I didn't have a choice." He stood up, and I saw that his skin was pale and waxy, like a candle that was starting to melt. "My family's been feeding the hungry one for 4 generations. My great-grandfather made a deal with it after the mine accident. Keep it fed with strangers, and it won't touch the town." "That's insane." "Is it? You ever notice how quiet Millfield is? How peaceful? No crime, no violence, no trouble at all. That's because the hungry one protects what belongs to it." Ezra was changing as he talked. His skin was becoming translucent, and I could see dark veins pulsing underneath. His eyes were sinking back into his skull. Every 7 years it needs fresh meat, fresh minds to copy and use as bait for the next group. Sarah's been down here long enough that she's becoming part of it, but she's wearing out. It needs someone new. "Run," I whispered to myself. "Run now." But my legs wouldn't move. The hunger that radiated from somewhere deep in the cave was so strong it felt like being pulled toward a black hole. I wanted to walk deeper into the tunnels, wanted to find whatever was calling to me and give it everything it wanted. "Don't fight it," Ezra said. His voice was getting hollow, echoing like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Fighting just makes it hurt worse." I forced myself to take one step backward, then another. Ezra's face was collapsing now, the skin pulling tight against his skull. But he was still smiling. "It's already too late anyway," he said. "You've been breathing the air down here for hours. You've been drenched. King the water from your canteen that you filled at the stream near the campsite. It's in your blood now, girl, part of you forever." That's when I felt it, a cold spreading through my chest, like ice water in my veins. My vision started to blur, and I could hear that terrible sound from the deep caves getting closer, like something massive dragging itself through the tunnels toward me. I ran through those caves for what felt like hours, following tunnels that made no sense, passing the same chambers over and over again. My breath came in sharp gasps, and every exhale turned to frost in the increasingly cold air. The sound was getting closer, that wet, sliding noise like something huge pulling itself across stone. And underneath it, I could hear voices. Sarah calling my name, Ezra laughing, my mother asking why I'd never come home for dinner. All lies, all bait. I stumbled into a vast underground chamber lit by some kind of phosphorescent moss growing on the walls. The space was so big I couldn't see the far end, just darkness stretching away like an underground ocean. And in the center of it all, I finally saw the hungry one. It wasn't like anything I could have imagined. Picture the roots of an enormous tree, if trees were made of pale flesh instead of wood. Thick tendrils spread across the floor and climbed the walls, pulsing with a slow heartbeat. At the center, where the trunk should be, was something that might have been a mouth, a circular opening lined with rows of needle teeth that never stopped moving. But the worst part wasn't what it looked like. The worst part was what surrounded it. Bodies, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all connected to the thing by fleshy cords that pulsed with stolen life. Some looked fresh, like they'd just laid down for a nap. Others were dried out, mumbling to themselves in languages I didn't recognize. The oldest ones, Han, had been there so long they'd started to look like part of the creature itself. And standing at the edge of the feeding area, waiting for me, was Sarah. She looked different now. Her skin had the same waxy quality I'd seen in Ezra, and her eyes were completely black. When she smiled, I saw that her teeth had become sharp and pointed. "Welcome home, Becky," she said. "You're not Sarah." I backed toward the tunnel I'd come from, but it was already sealing itself with new growth from the creature. "Of course I am. I'm just better now. Improved." She gestured toward the feeding thing. "It doesn't want to hurt us, Becky. It wants to perfect us, give us everything we need to be happy forever. By turning us into monsters? By freeing us from death, from pain, from the loneliness of being separate beings." Sarah took a step closer. "Look around you. All these people chose to stay. They could have fought, could have died, but they chose to become part of something greater." I looked at the bodies connected to the creature. Some of them were moving their lips, having conversations with people who weren't there. Others stared at the ceiling with empty smiles, lost in whatever dreams the thing was feeding them. "That's not living," I said. "That's just existing. Is there a difference? You were never happy before, Becky. Always searching for something, always trying to prove yourself. Down here, you don't have to search anymore. You've found what you were looking for." The creature made that whistling sound again, and I felt the cold in my chest get stronger. Part of me, a growing part, wanted to walk over to one of those feeding tubes and let it all just stop. No more questions, no more pain, no more wondering what happened to Sarah. But then I thought about my parents, about the friends who would wonder where I'd gone, about all the other journalists and hikers and curious people who would come looking for answers and end up as food for this thing. "No," I said. Sarah's face twisted with something that might have been disappointment or rage. "You don't get to choose, Becky. None of us do. It's already in your blood. You can feel it, can't you? The cold spreading through your body?" She was right. The cold was getting worse, making my fingers numb and my thoughts fuzzy. But it also made me angry. This thing had stolen my sister, had been stealing people for generations, and everyone just accepted it as the price of keeping their little town peaceful. I pulled out my emergency flare, the one thing Ezra had insisted I bring that I hadn't used yet. "Stay back," I said, pulling the cap off the flare. Sarah laughed. "What are you going to do, burn us? The hungry one has survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions. A little fire isn't going to—" I struck the flare, and red light blazed through the chamber. The creature let out that terrible whistling sound, much louder now, and all the bodies connected to it started screaming. But I wasn't aiming at the creature itself. I was aiming at the ceiling. The old mining tunnels were full of methane gas. I remembered that from the newspaper articles about the 1920s disaster. All I needed was one spark in the right place. "Becky, don't!" Sarah lunged toward me, but the cold in my blood was making me slower, clumsier. I managed to throw the flare up toward a crack in the ceiling where I could smell the sharp odor of gas. For a second, nothing happened. The flare tumbled through the air, trailing sparks and red smoke. Sarah tackled me to the ground, her fingers digging into my arms with inhuman strength. Then the world exploded. The gas ignited in a chain reaction that raced through the cave system like liquid lightning. The ceiling came down in chunks the size of cars, and the creature's whistling became a sound like a steam engine exploding. The feeding tubes snapped, spraying black fluid across the chamber, and the bodies they'd been connected to began aging rapidly, decades of stolen Tim. It catching up to them all at once. Sarah was screaming, but not in pain, in rage. Her face was changing, becoming something with too many teeth and eyes that burned like coals. She wasn't my sister anymore, maybe hadn't been for years. She was just another part of the creature, another lure it used to catch prey. "You've killed us all!" she shrieked as her body started to dissolve. "It will starve now, and when it does, it will take everyone in Millfield, everyone in the county." I tried to tell her I was sorry, but a chunk of ceiling caught me in the head and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on my back under the open sky. Real sky, not the endless gray of the hollow. My head felt like someone had hit it with a baseball bat, and I could taste blood in my mouth. I was at the bottom of Deep Creek Hollow, but it looked different now. The fog was gone, and I could see that most of the cave system had collapsed. Where the entrance used to be, there was just a pile of limestone boulders 20 feet high. Sarah's campsite was gone too, buried under tons of rock. No tent, no sleeping bag, no impossible diary, just rubble and the sound of water running somewhere underneath it all. I found the trail back up to the rim and climbed it slowly, every step sending spikes of pain through my skull. My watch was working again, and according to it, I'd been down in the hollow for less than 6 hours. But it felt like I'd aged 10 years. Ezra's truck was still parked where we'd left it, keys on the dashboard. I drove back to Millfield in a daze, not sure what I was going to tell people about where Ezra had gone. I needn't have worried. When I got to town, nobody seemed to remember that Ezra Blackthorne had ever existed. The motel lady looked at me blankly when I asked about him. The gas station attendant said he'd never heard the name. It was like the old man had been erased from everyone's memory except mine. I never wrote the article about the disappearances. How could I? Who would believe a story about an ancient creature that fed on human life force? Instead, I packed up my things and drove back to Charleston, telling everyone I'd gotten food poisoning and had to cut the trip short. But I couldn't just forget what had happened. I started researching everything I could find about Deep Creek Hollow, about the Cherokee legends, about the mining disaster. What I found made my blood run cold. The mine had closed after the cave-in, but it wasn't because 37 men had died. It was because 17 men had died, and 20 more had simply disappeared. The official report said they were probably buried under the collapse, but the rescue teams had found evidence that some of the miners had been alive for weeks after the accident, leaving desperate messages carved into the tunnel walls. Messages about something in the deep caves that whispered to them in their wives' voices. I also found records of disappearances going back to the 1800s. Cherokee hunting parties that never returned. Pioneer families who vanished while crossing the mountains. Always the same area, always the same pattern. 7 years of quiet, then a sudden cluster of missing people. The math was simple and horrible. If the creature needed to feed every 7 years, and if I'd really damaged it by bringing down the cave system, then the next feeding should have been due in 1983. I moved to Oregon in 1982. For a while, I thought maybe I'd actually killed it. The newspaper databases showed no unusual disappearances in the West Virginia mountains through the 80s and early 90s. I started to relax, started to believe that maybe the nightmare was finally over. Then in 1998, I got a call from a Charleston newspaper editor I used to know. "Becca, thank God you're alive. We heard you'd gone missing in the mountains back in '76. Never could figure out what happened to you." "I'm fine," I said. "I've been living in Oregon." "Well, that's a relief. Listen, 10. I know this is a weird request, but we've got some missing hikers near Deep Creek Hollow, and the police are asking if we know any journalists who might have information about the area. Your name came up because of that research you were doing. My hands started shaking. How many missing? 3 so far. College kids from WVU. They were supposed to be back from their camping trip 2 days ago. 22 years, not 7. The creature had been weakened by the cave-in, had needed time to recover, but it was feeding again. I hung up the phone and tried to convince myself it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd done what I could. I'd fought the thing and survived, which was more than most people could say. But those college kids didn't deserve to die because I hadn't finished the job. I flew back to West Virginia the next day. Millfield looked exactly the same as it had in 1976, like time had stopped there. Even the motel lady was the same, though she should have been 22 years older. She looked at me with the same suspicious eyes, asked me the same questions about what brought me to town. "You look familiar," she said, squinting at me. "You've been here before?" "A long time ago," I said. I drove out to Deep Creek Hollow alone this time. The road was more overgrown, but the warning sign was still there. Beyond it, the gorge looked different. The rock slide from my explosion had created a natural dam, and there was a small lake at the bottom now where the cave entrance used to be. For a moment I felt hopeful. Maybe the water had drowned whatever was left of the creature. Maybe the missing hikers were just lost somewhere else, and I was chasing ghosts. Then I saw the bubbles. The lake was perfectly still except for one spot near the center, where streams of bubbles rose to the surface in a steady pattern, like something breathing underwater. I watched those bubbles for an hour, timing them with my watch, every 30 seconds, regular as clockwork. Whatever was down there was still alive. That night, I called in an anonymous tip to the State Environmental Agency claiming there was illegal toxic waste dumping in Deep Creek Hollow. It took them 3 months to get the permits and equipment needed to drain the lake. What they found underneath made the evening news. The cave system hadn't completely collapsed. There were still open chambers deep below the rock slide, and something had been living in them all these years. The official report called it an unknown species of cave-dwelling fungus that had grown to enormous size in the isolated environment. They said it was probably harmless, just a biological curiosity. But I noticed they sealed the area with concrete and posted guards there for the next 6 months. The missing college students were never found. I stayed in West Virginia for a few more weeks, reading every newspaper and talking to everyone I could about the hollow. What I learned convinced me that the creature wasn't dead, just contained. The concrete wouldn't hold it forever. Nothing would. It had been feeding in those mountains for thousands of years, and it would find a way to feed again. Maybe not for decades, maybe not for a century, but eventually. All I'd done was buy time. I moved back to Oregon and tried to live a normal life. I got married to a nice man who sold insurance and never asked too many questions about my past. We had 2 children, both girls, and I made sure they were afraid of caves and deep water and places where cell phones didn't work. But I kept watching the news from West Virginia, kept a Google alert set up for Deep Creek Hollow and missing hikers and unexplained disappearances. For 25 years, there was nothing. Then, last month, I got an email from a young journalist in Charleston. She was researching a story about missing persons in Appalachia and had found my name in some old police files. She wanted to know if I remembered anything about my sister's disappearance. Back in 1966. Her name was Jennifer Ashford. She was my great-niece, Sarah's brother's granddaughter. She was 21 years old, blonde, and according to her Facebook page, she loved camping and hiking. The email was sent from Deep Creek Hollow, West Virginia. I tried calling her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried calling the police, but they said they couldn't start looking for someone who'd only been out of contact for a day. So here I am, writing this story instead of sleeping, because I know I'm too old to go back to that hollow one more time. My hands shake too much to hold a camera steady, and my heart couldn't take another trip down those limestone trails. But maybe you're reading this, and you're young and strong and brave enough to do what I can't. Maybe you can find Jennifer before she becomes another voice calling from the caves, another lure to trap the next generation of victims. If you decide to go looking for her, remember a few things. Don't trust anyone from Millfield. The creature has had decades to extend its influence, and some of them might be connected to it now. Don't go alone, but don't bring anyone you care about either. If things go wrong, you want to be the only one who doesn't make it home. Bring fire, lots of it. Flares, gasoline, anything that burns hot and bright. The creature doesn't like sudden light or heat, and if you hear voices in the caves, voices of people you love, people you miss, people you'd do anything to see again, remember that they're not real. No matter how much they sound like the real thing, no matter how much you want to believe them, they're just echoes the creature uses to hunt. The hunger never stops. It never gets full, never gets satisfied, never gives up. All it does is wait, and copy, and feed. But sometimes, if you're very careful and very lucky, you can make it wait a little longer. I hope Jennifer is still alive down there. I hope she's smart enough to stay away from the voices and strong enough to find her way out of the maze. But I know the truth. I've known it for 7 years. Nobody leaves Deep Creek Hollow unchanged, and most people don't leave at all. My name is Rebecca Ashford, and I'm the only person left who remembers what really lives in those caves. When I die, the secret dies with me, and the next time someone goes missing near that hollow, there won't be anyone left to warn them. Unless you remember this story, unless you tell someone else, unless you keep the hunger from spreading to places where people don't expect it, don't know how to fight it, don't understand that some things are better left buried in the dark. The creature is still down there, waiting. It has all the time in the world, but we don't. My name is James Steelwater, and I wish to God I'd never heard of Raven's Ridge. It was October 1973 when they gave me the assignment. One last job before my retirement from the Army Corps of Engineers. 23 years of building bridges and dams, and this was supposed to be my easy ticket out. Survey a valley in Virginia, mark it for flooding, collect my pension. Simple. The previous survey team had gone in 3 weeks earlier. When the helicopter brought them out, 2 were catatonic and the other 4 kept drawing the same thing over and over. Twisted route patterns that covered every piece of paper they could find. The doc said it was some kind of group breakdown. Stress, they called it. Too much time in the woods. I'd seen stress before. This wasn't stress. But orders were orders, and I needed that pension. So I put together a new team. Dave Rodriguez, my equipment specialist. Kid was young but knew his stuff. Tom Walsh and Mike Chen, both good surveyors. Bill Harper, our radio man. And Joseph Crow Feather, the Cherokee consultant the government required us to bring. Joseph was different from the start. Maybe 50 years old, with long black hair streaked with gray and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. He barely spoke during our briefing in Richmond, just nodded when they explained about the new dam. But I caught him staring at me like he was trying to figure out if I was worth saving. The helicopter dropped us at Raven's Ridge on a Tuesday morning. The pilot couldn't get away fast enough. "Weather's been strange up here," he shouted over the rotors. "Trees growing faster than they should. Animals acting weird. You boys watch yourselves." I watched him disappear over the ridge, then turned to look at our home for the next 2 weeks. The valley was beautiful, I'll give it that. Ancient trees stretched up like cathedral pillars, some so wide it would take 6 men holding hands to circle them. The air smelled clean and green, and somewhere I could hear water running over rocks. Perfect October weather. Warm, but not hot, with that golden light that makes everything look like a painting. But something felt wrong from the start. The trees were too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the forest was swallowing the sound. And the roots, Jesus, the roots. They snaked above ground everywhere, thick as telephone poles, creating a maze we had to step over and around. "This is a sacred place," Joseph said quietly as we set up camp near a small creek. It was the first thing he'd said all day. "Sacred to who?" I asked, unpacking my surveying equipment. "To those who came before. And to those who live here now. I looked around. Nobody lives here, Joseph. That's why we're flooding it. He just smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. You'll see, Captain Stillwater. This place is very much alive. Dave was having trouble with the equipment. Our GPS readings kept pointing toward the center of the valley, no matter which direction we faced. The ground-penetrating radar showed something impossible, a root system that seemed to stretch for miles underground, all connected to something massive. Equipment's all screwy, Captain, Dave said, tapping the radar display. According to this, there's something the size of a football field under that big oak tree over there. I looked where he was pointing. In the heart of the valley stood the largest oak tree I'd ever seen. It had to be 300 feet tall and maybe 20 feet across. Its roots spread out from the base like the arms of a giant octopus, disappearing into the ground and popping up again hundreds of yards away. Probably limestone caves, I said. This whole area is built on limestone. That's why it's perfect for a reservoir. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The radar signature looked too organic, too purposeful, like a nervous system. That first night, we all had the same dream. We were underground, buried alive in rich black soil. Roots pressed against our faces, into our mouths and noses. We could feel the earth pulsing around us like a heartbeat. And somewhere in the darkness, something vast and ancient was waking up. I woke up gasping, dirt under my fingernails even though I'd been sleeping in my tent. The others were awake too, all of us staring at each other in the dim light of our camp lanterns. Just a dream, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. Joseph was sitting by the dying fire, whittling something from a piece of wood. The root mother knows you're here, he said without looking up. She's been sleeping for a long time, but the threat of death will wake even the deepest sleeper. There's no such thing as a root mother, I snapped. We're here to do a job, not listen to ghost stories. Joseph held up what he'd been carving. It was a perfect miniature of the great oak tree, complete with tiny roots. As I watched, one of the carved roots seemed to twitch. Ghost stories, Joseph repeated. Yes, Captain, that's exactly what these will be when you're done here. The next morning, all our survey stakes were gone. We'd planted them in a perfect grid pattern the day before, bright orange markers that should have been visible from space. Now there was nothing. Dave and I spent 2 hours looking for them while the others set up the equipment. We found them eventually, but not where we'd left them. Someone had pulled them up and replanted them in a perfect circle around the great oak tree. Not just stuck in the ground, but carefully planted, with little mounds of earth packed around each one like they'd been there for years. Who the hell did this? Dave asked, looking around the empty forest. And how did they do it so fast? I didn't have an answer. We were 50 miles from the nearest road, and the helicopter wasn't due back for 2 weeks. Nobody could have gotten in here without us knowing. Animals, I said, though I knew it sounded stupid even as I said it. Bears, maybe. Or vandals from that protest camp. But the Cherokee protesters were all back at the main road, and bears don't plant survey stakes in perfect geometric patterns. Joseph was examining one of the stakes when we got back to camp. He ran his fingers along the metal, then looked at his hand. His fingertips were stained green. Not animals, he said, and not people. Then what? I demanded. He pointed to the base of the stake. I knelt down and looked closer. Tiny green tendrils had wrapped around the metal, growing up from the soil. As I watched, one of them moved slightly, curling tighter around the stake like a finger. The forest is claiming your markers, Joseph said, making them part of itself. I jerked my hand back. The tendril had been reaching for my fingers. That's when Mike started screaming. He was about 50 yards away, taking measurements near one of the larger root systems. But now he was on his knees, clawing at his ears and screaming like someone was torturing him. We ran to him, but when we got there, he'd stopped screaming. He was just kneeling there, perfectly still, his hands pressed against the massive root beside him. Mike, Tom called. Mike, you okay? Mike turned to look at us, and his eyes were different. Still his eyes, but deeper somehow, older. Can you hear them? he asked in a voice that sounded like wind through leaves. They've been here so long, waiting, watching. They remember everything. Remember what? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Mike pressed his face against the root, and I swear I could see it pulse under his cheek like a living thing. The first people who came here, the ones who knew how to listen, they made a pact with the root mother, protection for the force. The tea and the forest would protect them. But then the new people came, the ones who only knew how to cut and burn and take. His voice was getting stranger, taking on an accent I couldn't place. Ancient. Foreign. Mike, get away from that thing, I ordered. That's an order. He smiled, but it wasn't Mike's smile. The root mother is waking up, Captain Steelwater. She can feel the threat coming. All that water, drowning her children, drowning her memories. She won't let it happen. Mike's hands were changing. His fingernails were growing longer, darker, curling into points. As I watched in horror, they kept growing, turning woody and brown like tiny roots. She needs vessels, Mike said, his voice barely human now. Bodies to speak through, hands to work with. The old pact is broken, so she'll make a new one. Dave grabbed my arm. Captain, we need to get out of here. Now. But Mike was faster than he should have been. He lunged forward, those root fingernails reaching for Dave's throat. I tackled him sideways, and we went down in a heap on the forest floor. Mike was strong, stronger than any man his size should be. But worse than that, the ground itself seemed to be helping him. Roots erupted from the soil, wrapping around my arms and legs, trying to pull me down. The radio, I shouted to Bill. Call for extraction. Bill was already running for the camp, but I could see more roots bursting from the ground between him and our equipment. The forest was moving, reshaping itself to trap us. Tom managed to hit Mike with a surveying rod, and for a moment his grip loosened. The three of us who were still human ran for the camp, jumping over roots that seemed to rise up to trip us. Bill was bent over the radio, frantically turning dials. No good, Captain. Something's jamming us. All I'm getting is static. Behind us, Mike was walking slowly through the forest, and everywhere his feet touched, new growth sprouted. Flowers bloomed in his footsteps. Vines reached out to caress his arms like old friends. Pack only what we need, I ordered. We're hiking out of here. But as we grabbed our gear, I saw Joseph standing calmly by the fire, still whittling his little wooden tree. Aren't you coming? I asked. He shook his head. This is where I belong, Captain. This is where my people made their choice long ago. But you still have time to make yours. What choice? Joseph held up the wooden carving. It was perfect now, every detail exact, and I could swear I felt it watching me. Help her or run from her, but you can't fight her. Not here, not in her own house. Mike had reached our camp. He moved like he was dancing, and plants bloomed around him with every step. When he smiled at us, his teeth were brown and pointed like thorns. She wants to show you something, he said in that voice that wasn't quite his anymore. Deep in the earth, where the memories live. Come and see what you're really destroying. That's when I noticed the ground under our feet was getting soft. We ran. I don't care what that says about me as a soldier or an officer. When the ground starts trying to swallow you and your teammate grows root fingers, you run like hell. The forest fought us every step of the way. Branches reached down to tangle in our hair. Roots rose up to catch our feet. The path we'd used to get to our campsite was gone, replaced by a wall of thorns that hadn't been there an hour before. Dave was carrying the radio, trying to get a signal as we climbed toward higher ground. Tom and Bill stayed close behind me, all of us breathing hard and looking over our shoulders. Behind us I could hear Mike singing in that strange language, and the sound of growing things, creaking wood, rustling leaves, the whisper of new shoots breaking through soil. This way, I said, pointing toward what looked like a gap in the trees. If we can reach the ridge, maybe we can signal for help. But the gap moved as we approached it, closing like a wound, awling. The forest was reshaping itself around us, trapping us in a maze of living wood. "Captain," Tom gasped, "look at Bill." I turned around and felt my stomach drop. Bill was changing. Too. Green veins were spreading up his arms like infection, and his hair was starting to grow longer, turning from brown to a deep forest green. He was still human, still scared, but something else was taking him over. "I can hear her," he whispered, his voice taking on that same wind-through-leaves quality Mike had developed. "She's so old, Captain, so old and so tired of being hurt. Every tree they cut is like losing a child. Every stream they poison burns like acid in her veins." "Fight it," I ordered. "Whatever this is, fight it." But Bill was already pressing his palms against the trunk of a nearby tree. Where he touched the bark, it began to glow with a soft green light. "She doesn't want to hurt you," he said. "She just wants you to understand, to feel what she feels when the chainsaws come, to know what it's like to watch your children die." Dave grabbed my arm. "The radio's picking something up," he said. "Listen." He held the radio out, and through the static, I could hear voices. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all speaking in unison, some in English, some in languages I didn't recognize. But they were all saying the same thing. Come home. Come into the earth. Rest in the roots. Be part of forever. "Jesus," Tom whispered. "How many people has this thing taken?" That's when I understood. The Cherokee who'd lived here before the government moved them out. The settlers who'd tried to farm this valley. The loggers who'd come to cut the timber. They hadn't left. They'd been absorbed, taken into the root mother's consciousness, made part of her defense system. And now, she wanted us. Bill let out a cry that wasn't quite human anymore. His feet were sinking into the ground, not falling through it, but melting into it like the soil was part of him. Root tendrils were wrapping around his legs, pulling him deeper. "Help me!" he screamed. But even as he said it, his face was changing. His skin was taking on a bark-like texture, and his eyes were turning the deep green of old moss. Dave and I tried to pull him out, but the roots were too strong. They coiled around our arms when we grabbed Bill, trying to drag us down too. For a terrifying moment, I felt the pull of the earth, felt how easy it would be to just let go and sink into the warm, dark soil. Then Tom hit one of the roots with his surveying equipment, and it recoiled like a snake. We jerked backward, pulling free, but Bill was already gone. The ground closed over him like water, leaving only disturbed earth and a few scattered leaves. "We have to find the center," I said, my mind racing. "The heart of this thing. If we can reach that big oak tree, maybe we can figure out how to stop it." "Stop it?" Dave stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Captain, we need to get out of here." "And go where? Look around, Dave. The forest goes on for miles in every direction, and it's all connected, all part of her. We can run until we collapse, but we'll still be in her territory." As if to prove my point, the trees around us began to move. Not swaying in the wind. There was no wind. Actually moving, their roots pulling up from the ground and replanting themselves in new spots. In minutes, we were surrounded by a tight circle of massive trunks, their branches interweaving overhead to block out the sky. We were in a living prison. That's when I heard Joseph's voice, though he was nowhere to be seen. "The old stories tell of a pact." His words seemed to come from the trees themselves. An agreement between the first people and the root mother. They would protect her, and she would share her wisdom. But the pact was broken when the Cherokee were forced to leave. Now she trusts no one. "Where are you?" I called out. "I am where I have always belonged," Joseph's voice answered. "In the earth, in the roots, in the memories of my people." A section of bark on one of the trees began to shift and change, forming the rough outline of a human face. Joseph's face, but made of wood and moss and living vine. "She will not let the valley be flooded," he said. "She has waited too long, sacrificed too much. Every person who enters her domain becomes part of her defense. You can join willingly, or she will take you as she took the others." There has to be another way, I insisted. The bark face smiled sadly. Perhaps. But it would require a sacrifice greater than she has ever asked before, greater than you would be willing to give. Before I could ask what he meant, the ground beneath Tom began to soften. He sank to his ankles, then his knees, crying out in panic as root tendrils wrapped around his legs. But this time was different. Instead of pulling him down gently like they had with Bill, the roots were rough, angry. They squeezed tight enough to make Tom scream, and I could see blood seeping through his pants where they cut into his skin. "She's getting impatient," Joseph's tree voice said. "Time is running out for all of you." Dave was trying to dig Tom out with his hands, but every handful of soil he pulled away was immediately replaced by new growth. The roots were pulling Tom deeper, and I could see the same green infection starting to spread up his arms. "Choose quickly, Captain," the Joseph tree said. "Join her willingly, or watch your men suffer as they're taken by force." Tom's screams were getting weaker. The green veins had reached his face now, and his eyes were starting to take on that deep forest color. But unlike the others, he was fighting it, and the root mother was fighting back. That's when I made my decision. "Let him go," I said, stepping forward. "Take me instead." The forest went completely silent. Even Tom stopped screaming. "Captain, no," Dave whispered. I knelt down and pressed my palms against the soft earth. Immediately I felt the presence of the root mother, vast and ancient and deeply, bone-achingly sad. She had been out, one for so long, cut off from the partnership she'd once shared with the Cherokee. Every tree that was cut, every stream that was poisoned, every road that was paved, she felt it all like physical wounds. "I understand," I said, and meant it. "I know what we were going to do to you, but there has to be a better way than this." For a moment I felt her considering. The roots around Tom loosened slightly, though they didn't let him go. Then I felt her anger, hot and overwhelming. She showed me visions, forests burning, rivers running black with pollution, entire ecosystems destroyed for shopping malls and parking lots. She showed me the future she saw coming, a world of concrete and steel where nothing green could grow. "You say you understand." Her voice filled my head like thunder. "But your people will destroy me anyway. They always do." "Not if I can help it," I said. And that's when I told her my plan. "The survey," I said, keeping my hands pressed to the earth. "Let me complete it." The root mother's presence in my mind turned sharp with suspicion. Through the soil, I could feel her vast network of roots and fungal connections, stretching for miles underground. She was everywhere in this valley, part of every tree and stream and blade of grass. "You want to map me for destruction?" Her voice rumbled through the ground. "Mark me for drowning." "No," I said. "I want to map you for protection." The roots around Tom loosened a bit more. I could feel her confusion, her wariness. "If I can document that this forest is alive in a way science doesn't understand yet, if I can prove that you're something completely new, they won't flood the valley. They'll study it instead. Protect it." Dave was staring at me like I'd gone insane. "Captain, what are you doing?" "Making a deal," I said, never taking my eyes off the bark face that was Joseph. "The old pact between your palm, Opal, and the root mother. What if we could make a new one?" Joseph's wooden features shifted, showing something that might have been hope. "The scientists will come," I continued, speaking, both to him and to the presence I could feel listening from beneath the soil. "Biologists, anthropologists, ecologists. People who want to understand, not destroy. Instead of flooding the valley, they'll make it a research preserve, protected forever. And in return," the root mother's voice was cautious, "no more taking people, no more forcing them to become part of you. Let the scientists study you willingly. Teach them what you've learned in all these centuries. Show them how to help other forests like this one." I could feel her considering it, weighing the offer against thousands of years of betrayal and loss. The forest around us held its breath. Then Tom screamed. The roots hadn't just been holding him. They'd been changing him. His legs below the knees were gone, replaced by wooden appendages that sank deep into the earth. His arms had stretched and elongated, fingers branching into twig-like projections. But his face was still human, still terrified, still aware. "She's hedging her bets," Dave said grimly. "Keeping our guy just in case you're lying." "I'm not lying," I shouted, pressing my hands harder against the ground. "But you have to trust me. Let him go, let all of them go, and I'll give you what you really want." "Which is what?" the root mother asked. "Proof that you're worth saving." I pulled out my notebook and started sketching quickly. Not the survey markers and measurement points I was supposed to be documenting, but the truth of what I'd found here. The root network that stretched for miles. The evidence of a plant intelligence unlike anything science had ever discovered. The potential for learning that could revolutionize our understanding of forest ecosystems. "This goes to the EPA," I said, still drawing, "to the National Science Foundation, to every environmental group in the country, but only if you let my men go." The root mother was quiet for a long moment. Then I felt her presence withdraw from Tom, and his wooden legs began to dissolve back into flesh and bone. He collapsed, gasping, but he was human again. "You would betray your own kind?" she asked. "I'm trying to save both our kinds," I said. "This valley doesn't have to die for a dam that we probably don't even need. And you don't have to be alone anymore." I could feel her searching my mind, looking for lies or deception. What she found instead was the truth, that I'd spent my whole career building things that sometimes destroyed as much as they created, that I was tired of being part of the problem instead of the solution. "One more condition," I said. "The people you've already taken, Mike, Bill, all the others over the years, give them back their choice. Let them decide if they want to stay with you or return to the human world." "Some have been part of me for decades," she said. "Centuries. They may not remember what it was to be merely human." "Then teach them," I said. "Help them remember. If they choose to stay, that's their decision. But it has to be a choice, not a prison." The forest began to change around us. The circle of trees that had trapped us started to move apart, their roots sliding through the soil like enormous snakes. In the growing spaces between them, people began to emerge from the ground. Some looked almost normal, just dirty and confused. Others had been changed more deeply, skin like bark, hair like moss, eyes the color of deep leaves. But they were all conscious, all aware, all looking around like they were waking up from a very long dream. Mike was among them, his root fingernails gone, his eyes human again. He looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and loss. "She's beautiful, Captain," he said quietly. "Being part of her, it's like being part of everything. Every tree, every stream, every living thing. We never felt so connected to anything." "Do you want to stay?" I asked. He looked around at the other emerged people, at the magnificent forest, at the root mother's presence that I could still feel thrumming through the ground. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I do, but not as a prisoner, as a partner." About half of the people chose to stay. The others, including Bill and Tom, opted to return to the human world, though I could see in their eyes that part of them would always belong to the forest. The root mother's presence touched my mind one last time. "Your survey, Captain Stillwater?" I held up my notebook, filled now with sketches and measurements and notes that would revolutionize forest science, if anyone believed them. "Consider it complete," I said. The helicopter came back 2 weeks later, right on schedule. The pilot was the same guy who'd dropped us off, and his eyes went wide when he saw what we were bringing back. My survey notes, filled with measurements and drawings that would make every scientist in the world want to visit Raven's Ridge. Soil samples that showed root networks no one had ever documented. Photographs of trees that seemed to respond to human presence. But mostly he stared at Tom and Bill, who looked like they'd been through hell but couldn't stop talking about the most incredible experience of their lives. "You find what you were looking for?" the pilot asked as we loaded our gear. "More than we were looking for," I said. The flight back to Richmond was quiet. Tom and Bill dozed fitfully, still recovering from their transformation. Dave sat in the corner, going through our equipment and shaking his head at readings that shouldn't have been possible. I spent the flight writing my report. It took me 3 drafts to get it right. Too much truth and they'd lock me up in a psychiatric ward. Too little and the valley would get flooded anyway, destroyed by people who couldn't see past the dollar signs of a new reservoir. In the end, I stuck to the scientific evidence. Documented proof of a root network that appeared to show signs of coordinated intelligence, soil chemistry that suggested unprecedented ecological relationships, wildlife behavior that indicated the presence of some kind of organizing principle in the forest ecosystem. I buried the supernatural stuff deep in technical language and let the readers draw their own conclusions. It worked. The story broke 6 months later. Army engineer discovers evidence of forest intelligence in Virginia Valley. Environmental groups seized on it. Scientists demanded access. The dam project was quietly shelved pending further study. Ravens Ridge became the Ravens Ridge Ecological Research Preserve, protected by federal law and monitored by teams of eager graduate students who thought they were studying an unusual example of forest networking. They had no idea how right they were. I visit sometimes. Not officially. I retired right after submitting my report, took my pension and moved to a cabin in Montana where the closest neighbor is 5 miles away. But every few months I drive back to Virginia and hike into the preserve. The tourists and day hikers stick to the marked trails, but I know the old paths. I can find my way to the heart of the valley, where the great oak tree still stands, even larger now than before. Mike is usually there, along with some of the others who chose to stay. They look human enough, if you don't look too closely. But their eyes hold depths that go back centuries, and sometimes when they smile, you can see roots instead of teeth. They're happy, though, connected to something vast and ancient and wise in a way most people never get to experience. They've become part of a living library that holds the memory of every creature that's ever lived in the forest. "How are the scientists treating her?" I asked Mike on my last visit. He laughed, and it sounded like wind chimes made of leaves. "She likes them. They ask questions instead of making demands. They listen instead of assuming they already know everything. Some of them are starting to understand what she really is." "Any volunteers?" "A few. Graduate students mostly. Young people who can feel there's something more here than just trees and dirt. She's careful with them, though. Makes sure they really want it before she offers them the choice." I nodded. The root mother had learned from our bargain. No more taking people by force. No more desperate attempts to defend herself by creating unwilling vessels. Instead, she was building something new, a partnership between human science and ancient forest wisdom. It wouldn't happen overnight. It might take generations. But for the first time in centuries, the root mother had hope instead of just fear. And I had something too. The knowledge that maybe, sometimes, you can build something instead of just tearing it down. Even an old soldier like me. I left the preserve as the sun was setting, hiking back through forests that hummed with contentment. Behind me I could hear the sound of growing things, the whisper of leaves, the deep, slow breathing of a living world that had finally found a reason to trust humanity again. My name is James Steelwater, and I used to build dams. Now I build bridges between worlds that were never supposed to meet. And sometimes, late at night in my Montana cabin, I can still feel the root mother's presence at the edge of my dreams, patient and vast and grateful. She's not alone anymore. Neither am I. My name is Lisa Morrison, and I wish I'd never heard of Shadow Mountain. I was 25 back then, working as a social worker for the state of Tennessee. I thought I was pretty good at my job. I'd helped lots of kids get away from bad homes and into better ones. I believed every child deserved a chance, no matter how broken they seemed. That's probably why they gave me the Shadow Mountain case. 7 kids had gone missing over 2 years, all from the same area way up in the mountains. The other social workers didn't want to deal with it. They said the mountain people were weird and didn't like outsiders. I remember sitting in my boss's office looking at the files. 7 children, ages 6 to 10. Their pictures stared back at me. Gap-toothed smiles, messy hair, innocent eyes. Mary Henderson, 8 years old. The Clark twins, both 6. Little Jenny Walsh, barely 7. And 3 others, all gone without a trace. The families up there don't trust the government, my boss told me. They homeschool their kids and live off the land. Very religious. The local sheriff says they're cooperating, but he shrugged. Sheriff Tom Bradley had called in the state because the disappearances were getting attention from the newspapers. Bad publicity for a small mountain county. I'd spoken to him on the phone, and his voice was tired, like a man who'd seen too much. These mountain folk got their own ways, he'd said. Sometimes kids just wander off up there. Bears get them, or they fall down a cliff. Nature's not forgiving. But something about the cases bothered me. All 7 children had one thing in common. They'd all been through some kind of trauma recently. Parents fighting, a death in the family, or abuse. Hurt kids were more likely to run away, sure, but 7 of them? In the same area? I packed my car with camping gear, files, and enough food for a week, Shadow Mount. Ayan was 60 miles from the nearest real town, connected only by dirt roads that turned to mud when it rained. No phone lines ran up there. No electricity either. If something went wrong, I'd be on my own. The drive took 3 hours on winding mountain roads. October in Tennessee meant the leaves were turning, painting the hills in reds and golds. It should have been beautiful, but the higher I climbed, the more uneasy I felt. The trees grew thicker, blocking out the sun. The air got colder. I met Sheriff Bradley at a gas station in the last real town before the mountains. He was a big man, maybe 48, with gray in his beard and tired eyes. He looked at my small car and shook his head. "You sure about this, Miss Morrison? These people don't take kindly to strangers asking questions about their young ones." 7 children are missing, Sheriff. That's my job." He sighed and got into his patrol truck. "Follow me then, but don't say I didn't warn you." The road up Shadow Mountain was barely wide enough for one car. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches scraping my windows. I could see why people up here felt cut off from the world. It was like driving into another time, another place where modern rules didn't apply. We passed 3 mailboxes in 5 miles. Bradley pointed to each one as we drove by. Henderson Place is about a mile up that trail. Clarks live 2 miles further north. The Walshes are on the backside of the mountain. All 3 families had lost children. All 3 had refused to talk much to the police. They buried their own dead and handled their own problems. But 7 missing kids was more than any small community could ignore, no matter how private they wanted to be. The first thing I noticed when we reached the Henderson place was how quiet it was. No dogs barking, no kids playing in the yard. Just silence that felt heavy and wrong. The cabin was small and dark, with smoke coming from a stone chimney. A woman in a faded dress watched us from the front porch. Mrs. Henderson looked older than her 40 years. Her face was lined with worry, and her hands shook when she poured us coffee from a pot that had been sitting on the wood stove too long. Mary was playing in the yard, she told me, not meeting my eyes. Then she was gone. We looked everywhere. Her husband sat in the corner, whittling a piece of wood with a knife. He hadn't said a word since we arrived. "Did Mary seem upset about anything before she disappeared?" I asked gently. Mrs. Henderson's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "She'd been having nightmares. Started after—" She glanced at her husband. "After she saw her daddy whip the dog for getting into the chicken coop. The dog died from it. Mary loved that old hound." I wrote notes, trying to stay professional, but my heart was breaking for this little girl who'd watched something terrible happen and then vanished into the woods. "She kept drawing pictures after that," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Dark pictures with scary things in them. Do you still have those drawings?" She disappeared into a back room and came back with a handful of papers. My blood went cold when I saw them. They were child's drawings done in black crayon, stick figures running through trees, and watching from the shadows, other figures with glowing eyes and sharp teeth. In every picture, the monsters were small, like children. As we prepared to leave, I caught sight of something at the edge of the woods. A flash of pale skin, there and gone so fast I wasn't sure I'd seen anything at all. But Mrs. Henderson had noticed me looking. "You see them sometimes," she whispered. "At night, mostly. Watching." Sheriff Bradley was quiet as we drove away. Finally, he said, "You getting the picture now, Miss Morrison?" I wasn't sure what picture he meant, but I was starting to understand that Shadow Mountain held secrets darker than I'd imagined. And somewhere in those dark woods, 7 children were either Leif or Ost dead or something worse. The sun was setting behind the mountains and shadows were getting longer. I had a feeling that whatever was happening up here got worse after dark. The Clark family lived deeper in the mountains where the trees grew so thick that noon looked like evening. Their cabin was even smaller than the Hendersons', and I could smell something cooking that made my stomach turn. Mr. Clark met us at the door with a shotgun in his hands. He was a thin man with wild eyes and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months. "Ain't got nothing more to say about the boys," he announced before we'd even introduced ourselves. Sheriff Bradley held up his hands peacefully. "Now, Calvin, this here's Miss Morrison from the state. She's just trying to help find Tommy and Billy." The twins had been 6 years old when they disappeared 3 months ago. Their mother sat in a rocking chair by the fire, staring at nothing. She hadn't spoken a word since we arrived. "Boys went out to check the rabbit traps," Mr. Clark said, his gun still pointed in our general direction. "Never came back. That's all there is to it." "Did you follow their trail?" I asked. His laugh was bitter. "Course we did. Tracks went right to Eagle's Drop. That's a cliff about a quarter-mile north of here. 100-foot drop, straight down onto rocks." "But you didn't find nothing. No bodies, no blood, nothing. Tracks just ended at the edge like the boys jumped off and grew wings." I felt that chill again, the same one I'd gotten at the Henderson place. "Mr. Clark, had Tommy and Billy been upset about anything recently?" His wife suddenly spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They saw their daddy kill that man." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mr. Clark's knuckles went white on his shotgun. "Wasn't no man," he said through clenched teeth. "Was a thief come to steal our food. Had a right to defend my family." "The boys saw it happen?" I pressed gently. Mrs. Clark nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Shot him right in front of them. They've been having nightmares ever since, drawing pictures of dead people and monsters." "Sarah, shut your mouth," Mr. Clark snapped. But she couldn't stop now that she'd started. They kept saying something was calling to them from the woods. Said they could hear children crying at night, wanting them to come play. My pen had stopped moving. Children crying? Every night for a week before they disappeared. We heard it too, but figured it was just wind in the trees or maybe a wildcat. But the boys, they knew it was kids calling them. Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat. "We should probably head back before dark." As we walked to our vehicles, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. In the soft dirt near the cabin, there were small footprints, child-sized but wrong somehow. The toes were too long, and there were marks that looked almost like claws. "Sheriff," I called, pointing to the tracks. He looked down, and his face went pale. "Raccoon prints. Gets confusing in soft earth." But I'd seen plenty of animal tracks in my life, and these weren't made by any raccoon. These looked almost human, except for those claw marks. We were walking back to the trucks when we heard it, a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. It was a child crying somewhere in the dark woods, the saddest sound I'd ever heard. "Mama?" the voice called. "Mama, help me!" Without thinking, I started toward the sound. Sheriff Bradley grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "Don't," he said, and his voice was shaking. "Just don't." "But there's a child out there." "No," he said, pulling me toward the truck. "There ain't." As we drove away, I kept looking back at the dark trees. The crying followed us for almost a mile, always staying just out of sight, always sounding like it was coming from a different direction. "What's really happening up here, Sheriff?" I asked when we finally couldn't hear the crying any more. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the engine. "There's old stories about these mountains, Miss Morrison. Stories about children who went into the woods and came back. Changed. Stories the old-timers told to keep their young ones close to home. You're talking about folklore. Am I? He looked at me with those tired eyes. 7 kids gone in 2 years. All of them hurt and scared before they disappeared. All of them heard calling in the night before they vanished. Tell me that's normal. We drove in silence until we reached the main road. As we passed the Henderson place, I saw a light moving through the trees. A flashlight maybe, or a lantern. But it was moving wrong, jerky and quick, like someone running. Or like something small and fast was carrying it. Did you see that? I asked. Sheriff Bradley didn't answer, but his hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. That night, I stayed in a motel in the valley below Shadow Mountain. I spread the files across the bed and studied every detail. 7 children, all traumatized, all heard voices calling them before they disappeared. The drawings Mrs. Henderson had shown me kept coming back to mind. Those dark figures with glowing eyes, small like children, but definitely not human. Around midnight, I heard something that made me sit up in bed. It was faint, carried on the wind from the mountains above, children laughing. But it wasn't the happy sound kids make when they're playing. This was different, wild and hungry and wrong. It echoed off the mountain walls until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. I locked my motel room door and checked it twice before trying to sleep. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those drawings, children with claws and glowing eyes, watching from the shadows. And I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere up on Shadow Mow. 10. Something was watching me too. I should have left Shadow Mountain that night. Should have driven back to the state office and recommended the case be turned over to the FBI, but I kept thinking about those 7 missing children, and I couldn't give up on them. The next morning I went back up the mountain alone. Sheriff Bradley had been called away on another case, or so the deputy told me. I suspected he just didn't want to face whatever was hiding in those woods. The Walsh family lived on the backside of Shadow Mountain, where the trees were so thick they blocked out most of the sky. Their cabin was the smallest yet, and I could tell they were barely scraping by. Jenny Walsh had disappeared just 2 weeks ago. Mrs. Walsh answered the door with her youngest child, a boy about 4, clinging to her leg. She looked terrified when she saw me. "Please," she whispered, glancing around like something might be listening. "Don't make me talk about Jenny. They don't like it when we talk about the taken children." "Who doesn't like it?" She pulled me inside quickly and locked the door. The cabin was dark and cold, with blankets hung over the windows. "They come at night," she said, her voice shaking. "Looking for her, calling her name. They know she's gone, but they keep coming back." Mr. Walsh sat in a corner, rocking back and forth. His eyes were wild, and he kept muttering something I couldn't understand. "My husband hasn't slept since Jenny disappeared," Mrs. Walsh explained. "He keeps saying he can hear her crying in the walls." "Tell me what happened the night she vanished." Mrs. Walsh hugged her little boy closer. Jenny had been having nightmares for weeks, ever since she saw... She looked at her husband. Since she saw what happened to her baby brother. What happened? He was born wrong. Couldn't breathe right. My husband, he put a pillow over the baby's face. Said it was a kindness. But Jenny saw. My heart sank. Another traumatized child. Another tragedy that had broken an innocent mind. The night she disappeared, Jenny kept saying, and she could hear other children playing outside. Happy children who wanted her to join them. I told her it was just her imagination, but around midnight she got out of bed and walked to the front door. "You saw her leave?" I tried to stop her, but it was like she was sleepwalking. She opened the door and walked out into the woods, following voices only she could hear. We searched all night, but Mrs. Walsh started crying. "We found her footprints leading to Devil's Hole." I knew that name from the case files. Devil's Hole was a deep cave system that ran through the heart of Shadow Mountain. Local legend said it went down for miles, connecting to other caves all through the mountains. "Has anyone searched the caves?" Mr. Walsh finally looked up, his eyes focusing on me for the first time. "Can't," he croaked. Things live down there. Old things. Hungry things. Has anyone actually seen these things? Mrs. Walsh nodded slowly. Jenny wasn't the first. Our neighbor's boy, Billy Henderson, Mary's older brother, he went missing 5 years ago. But 3 months later, we saw him. You saw Billy Henderson? The missing boy? Coming out of the woods one night, but he was different. Moved wrong, smelled wrong, and his eyes, she shuddered. They glowed in the dark like an animal's. I felt like ice water was running through my veins. What happened when you saw him? He looked right at us, smiled with too many teeth, and disappeared back into the trees. Next morning, we found our chickens torn apart. Not eaten, just destroyed. Like something had killed them for fun. As she spoke, her little boy started whimpering and pointing at the covered windows. They're out there, he whispered. The hungry children. They want me to come play. Mrs. Walsh rushed to the window and peered through a gap in the blankets. Her face went white. Oh, God, she breathed. They're here. I looked over her shoulder and saw them. 7 small figures standing at the edge of the woods, perfectly still. They were too far away to see clearly, but something about their shape was wrong. They stood too straight, held their heads at odd angles. How long do they usually stay? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Hours sometimes? Just watching, waiting. As we stood there, one of the figures moved. It didn't walk. It flowed across the ground like smoke, covering 30 yards in seconds. Now I could see it more clearly, and I wished I couldn't. It had been a child once, maybe 8 or 9 years old. But now its limbs were too long, its fingers ended in claws, and its eyes were solid black. When it smiled, I saw rows of sharp teeth. It pressed its face against the window and tapped on the glass with one clawed finger. Jenny, it whispered, its voice like wind through dead leaves. Jenny, come play with us. Mrs. Walsh's little boy started screaming. The thing at the window turned its black eyes toward me and tilted its head like a curious dog. When it smiled again, I saw that its teeth were stained with blood. New friend, it whispered. Pretty lady wants to play too. More figures emerged from the woods. I counted them. 7 total, all of them moving with that same inhuman grace. All of them had been children once, I realized. These were the missing kids, transformed into something monstrous. How do we get rid of them? I asked. Mr. Walsh laughed, a broken sound. You don't. They'll follow you now. Once they see you, they never forget. The creatures circled the cabin for hours, tapping on walls, whispering through cracks, calling to the little boy to come outside and play. When the sun finally set, they faded back into the woods like shadows. But I knew they weren't gone. I could feel them watching from the darkness, patient as spiders in their web. Mrs. Walsh gave me directions to Devil's Hole. If you're fool enough to go down there, she said, take this. She handed me a small silver cross. Won't stop them, but it might slow him down. As I drove away from the Walsh cabin, I checked my rearview mirror constantly. Sometimes I thought I saw small shapes running between the trees, keeping pace with my truck. Sometimes I thought I heard children laughing in the wind. I was beginning to understand that Shadow Mountain held a secret darker than missing children. Something lived in those caves, something that fed on innocence and trauma, and now it knew I was there. The hunt was about to begin. I should have driven straight down the mountain and never looked back. Instead, I found myself parking at the trail that led to Devil's Hole as the sun disappeared behind the peaks. I had a flashlight, Mrs. Walsh's silver cross, and a growing certainty that I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The trail to the cave wound through the darkest part of the forest. My flashlight beam seemed to get swallowed up by the trees, and I kept hearing sounds that made me stop and listen. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and worst of all, children giggling just out of sight. Devil's Hole was a crack in the mountainside about 6 feet wide and twice as tall. Cold air flowed out of it, carrying a smell like wet earth and something else, something rotten. I stood at the entrance for a long time, trying to work up the courage to go inside. That's when Sheriff Bradley found me. "Figured you'd end up here eventually," he said, his voice sad and tired. "Sheriff, thank God. I was just about to go down into that hole and get yourself killed." He stepped into my flashlight beam, and I saw he was carrying a shotgun. "Can't let you do that, Miss Morrison." Something in his tone made me step backward. "Why not?" "Because it's not your place. This mountain has its own way of handling things." The pieces suddenly clicked together in my mind. All those missing children, all those traumatized kids who'd hear soft voices calling them into the woods. The way Sheriff Bradley had tried to discourage me from the beginning. "You know what's down there," I said. "I know a lot of things." He raised the shotgun slightly. "I know that some children can't be saved. I know that sometimes sacrificing a few protects many, and I know that you're about to ruin 20 years of careful balance." Sacrificing? The word came out as a whisper. "You've been feeding children to whatever lives in that cave." His face was stone. "Not feeding, offering. When a child's mind is broken by trauma, when they're damaged beyond repair, the mountain takes them. In return, it leaves the other children alone. Those are human beings. Children. Were they?" His voice was cold now. "Billy Henderson saw his father beat a dog to death. The Clark twins watched their daddy murder a man. Jenny Walsh saw her baby brother smothered. You think those children were ever going to be normal again?" I felt sick. "That doesn't give you the right to—" "I've kept this county safe for 20 years, he shouted. "Before I started making the offerings, we lost dozens of children. Whole families disappeared. The mountain was hungry and taking whatever it wanted." "What's really down there?" Sheriff Bradley's shoulders sagged. "Something old. Something that's been here since before the first settlers came. The Cherokee knew about it. They called it the Child Eater. It feeds on young minds, especially broken ones. Turns them into extensions of itself." As if summoned by his words, I heard movement in the cave behind me. Scraping sounds like claws on stone. Then whispers, multiple child voices speaking in unison. "Pretty lady came to play. Pretty lady wants to stay." I spun around and saw them emerging from the darkness. All 7 transformed children, moving on hands and feet like animals. Their eyes glowed with pale light, and their smiles were full of needle teeth. "I'm sorry, Miss Morrison," Sheriff Bradley said, backing away, "but the mountain has chosen you now." The creatures moved fast, faster than anything human should move. I ran, crashing through the forest with my flashlight beam swinging wildly. Behind me I could hear them laughing and calling, "Come play, come stay, come feed the dark." I made it to my car and locked the doors, but I knew that wouldn't stop them. As I started the engine, small hands began tapping on the windows. Faces appeared in my headlights. Innocent children's faces with monster eyes. I floored the gas pedal and drove straight through them. They scattered like smoke, reforming in my rearview mirror. They followed me all the way down the mountain, running alongside my car, their laughter echoing off the rock walls. I didn't stop driving until I reached the state police barracks 50 miles away. The officers there thought I was having a breakdown, a city social worker cracking under pressure from a tough case. They took my statement, but I could see they didn't believe a word of it. 2 days later, I got a call from Sheriff Bradley. "You need to come back," he said. "It's not finished with you. I'm never setting foot on that mountain again. Miss Morrison, 3 more children went missing last night, from families down in the valley. It's spreading, looking for you. The only way to stop it is to give it what it wants." "And what's that?" "You know what it wants." I hung up the phone, but I knew he was right. The thing in Devil's Hole had tasted my mind, and now it wouldn't be satisfied with anyone else. It would keep taking children, spreading down from the mountain like a disease until I gave myself to it. That night, I made my choice. I couldn't let more innocent children die because of my cowardice. I drove back to Shadow Mountain one last time with enough dynamite to bring down half the cave system. The The creatures were waiting for me at Devil's Hole, all 7 of them, plus something else, something huge and dark that spoke with 2 ear voices. Pretty lady came back. Pretty lady understands. I smiled as I lit the fuse. Yeah, I understand. Some monsters need to be stopped, even if it costs everything. The explosion shook the entire mountain. When the dust settled, Devil's Hole was sealed forever, and I was buried with the thing that had made monsters out of children. They found my body 3 days later, when the rescue teams finally cleared enough rubble to reach the cave entrance. The official report said I'd been investigating the missing children case when a gas pocket exploded, causing a cave-in. Sheriff Bradley disappeared that same night. Some say he couldn't live with the guilt. Others claim he went into the deep woods and was never seen again. The county hired a new sheriff, a young man from outside the mountains who knew nothing about the old agreements. The missing children were never found, of course. Their case files were marked presumed dead and stored away in dusty cabinets. The mountain families moved away one by one, saying the place felt cursed now. Shadow Mountain became just another empty wilderness area. But sometimes, hikers report strange things. Children's laughter echoing from sealed caves. Small footprints in the mud that end abruptly, as if whoever made them simply vanished. And late at night, when the wind blows just right through the mountain passes, some people swear they can hear a woman's voice warning them to stay away. My sacrifice stopped the creature that had been feeding on broken children for generations. The explosion collapsed most of the cave system, trapping it in the deep places where it belonged. But I learned something in those final moments before the dynamite went off. Evil like that doesn't die easily. Sometimes I wonder if it's really gone, or if it's just sleeping, waiting for the mountain to heal and the caves to open again. I wonder if somewhere in the darkness below Shadow Mountain, something still dreams of innocent children and hungry games. The files say 7 children disappeared on Shadow Mountain between 1982 and 1984. The files say they were probably killed by wild animals or fell from cliffs. The files say a social worker named Lisa Morrison died heroically trying to solve the case. The files don't mention the real truth, that some places in this world are just wrong, and some monsters wear the faces of children. They don't mention that sometimes, when the night is dark and the wind is still, you can hear them calling from the shadows, wanting you to come and play. I saved those 3 children who would have been taken next. I made sure no more families would have to sacrifice their broken young ones to appease an ancient hunger. But the cost was everything I had to give. If you ever find yourself driving through the mountains of Tennessee and you see a sign for Shadow Mountain, keep driving. Don't stop, don't explore, and whatever you do, don't listen if you hear children laughing in the woods. Some games are too dangerous to play, and some children should never be found. My name is Elena Blackwood, and I used to think I was smart. I had a PhD in psychology, taught at the university, and spent my free time proving that ghost stories were just tricks of the mind. That was before Hell's Gate, before I learned that some doors should never be opened. The letter came on a Tuesday in March 1979. The handwriting was shaky, like an old man's hands were trembling as he wrote. Dr. Blackwood, it said, I know you study strange things. We need your help. 3 families have gone missing near Hell's Gate Gorge. The police say they ran away, but their cars are still here. And the cars... Something melted the windows from the inside. No one will listen to us. Please come to Kentucky. Something is very wrong here. It was signed, Preacher Elijah Stone. I almost threw it away. After what happened in Ohio, when I claimed I found real ghost activity and lost my job when it turned out to be fake, I was careful about cases. But Hell's Gate Gorge was famous. I'd heard the stories, a deep crack in the earth where nothing would grow, where animals refused to go. Local people said it was cursed. I called my friend Marcus Wright. He was a physicist who liked to come along on my investigations with his fancy equipment. Want to take a trip to Kentucky? I asked. What's in Kentucky? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Marcus laughed. Sounds like my kind of mystery. I also called Jenny Mills, a photographer who worked for newspapers. She was young, maybe 25, but she was brave and took amazing pictures. I need someone to document whatever we find, I told her. Count me in, she said. I could use a good story. 3 days later, we drove through the mountains of eastern Kentucky. The roads got smaller and smaller until we were on dirt paths that barely fit our car. The trees seemed to close in around us. Everything was too quiet. Are you sure we are going the right way? Marcus asked from the back seat. I checked the map again. This should be it. Around the next bend, we saw the church. It was old, made of gray stone, sitting alone in a clearing. Behind it, the ground just ended, like someone had taken a giant knife and cut the earth in half. That was Hell's Gate Gorge. An old man came out of the church. He was tall and thin, with white hair and deep lines around his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Dr. Blackwood? His voice was rough. Thank God you came. I'm Elijah Stone. We shook hands. His skin was cold despite the warm day. Tell me about the missing families, I said. Preacher Stone's face went pale. The Johnsons disappeared 2 years ago. Car was found right at the edge there, windows melted from inside, but no bodies. Same with the Hendersons last year and the Millers 3 months ago. Always the same. Cars found, but people gone. What do the police think? They think people are running away from their problems, but these were good families, church families. And the cars, he shook his head. You have to see for yourself. He led us to the edge of the gorge. I felt my breath catch. The crack in the earth was enormous, maybe 800 feet deep and 50 feet wide. At the bottom, I could see strange yellow pools that steamed in the cool air. The smell hit me like a punch. Sulfur, like rotten eggs, so strong it made my eyes water. How deep does it go? Marcus asked, setting up his equipment. No one knows, Stone said. My grandfather tried to measure it once, dropped a stone tied to 800 feet of rope. Never hit bottom. Jenny was taking pictures, but she kept frowning at her camera. That's weird. My flash isn't working right. I looked around. Where's the nearest town? 20 miles, Stone said. We're alone out here. Just me and the church. My family has watched over this place for 5 generations. Watched over it? Stone looked uncomfortable. It's hard to explain. My great-grandfather built this church in 1834. He said something needed to be kept locked up down there, something that shouldn't get out. A chill ran down my back that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What kind of something? I don't know. But every generation, someone in my family stays here, keeps watch, keeps the door closed. What door? Stone pointed into the gorge. Look closer. I leaned forward and squinted. Deep in the shadows at the bottom, something glinted. It looked almost like an arch, a natural stone bridge spanning the narrowest part of the crack. That's not natural, Marcus said, checking his instruments. The rock formation doesn't make sense. No, Stone said quietly. It's not natural at all. As the sun began to set, the temperature dropped fast. We set up our camp in the church. Stone insisted we stay inside after dark. Why? I asked. Because that's when they wake up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching me. Around midnight, I heard Jenny whisper, "Do you guys hear that?" We all sat up in our sleeping bags. At first, there was only silence. Then I heard it, voices echoing from the gorge. They sounded far away, like people calling from the bottom of a well, but the words were wrong. Backwards, maybe. It's just wind, Marcus said, but his voice shook. Wind doesn't speak Latin, Stone said from the corner. They do this every night. It's gotten worse since the Millers disappeared. Who's they? I asked. Stone was quiet for a long time. The ones my family has been keeping locked up for over 100 years. The next morning I felt stupid for being scared. In daylight, everything seemed normal. Well, except for Hell's Gate itself. Even in bright sunshine, the bottom of the gorge stayed dark, and the smell was stronger. "I want to go down there," I said. "No." Stone grabbed my arm. "No one goes down there. How else can we figure out what had happened to those families?" "They're gone, Dr. Blackwood. Leave it alone." But I couldn't leave it alone. That's always been my problem. I need to know the truth, even when the truth is dangerous. Marcus had been running tests all morning. "Elena, you need to see this." His face was white. "My electromagnetic sensors are going crazy. There's more energy coming from that gorge than from a power plant." "What kind of energy?" "I don't know. I've never seen readings like this." Jenny had been taking pictures since dawn. "Look at these," she said, showing us her camera screen. "Tell me what you see." The photos showed the gorge, the stone arch at the bottom, the yellow pools. But in 3 of the pictures, there were shapes. Dark, human-like figures standing on the stone bridge. Tall, too tall, with arms that hung down to their knees. "Those weren't there when I took the pictures," Jenny whispered. "I would have seen them." My hands started shaking. Maybe it's a problem with the camera. "All 3 pictures? Same problem?" Marcus looked at his equipment again. "The energy readings are getting stronger. Whatever's down there, it's more active during the day." "That's backwards," Stone said. "They're supposed to be weaker in sunlight." "Supposed to be according to who?" "My grandfather's journal. He wrote down everything about this place, rules for keeping them contained." "Can we see this journal?" Stone hesitated. "It's disturbing. You won't like what it says. I need to see it." An hour later, Stone brought out an old leather book. The pages were yellow and brittle. The writing was in faded ink, sometimes hard to read. But what I could read made my blood cold. July 15th, 1943. The binding grows weak. Ezra says we need fresh blood for the ritual, but I can't bring myself to take another life. The things below grow restless. They whisper promises of knowledge, potom, where anything we desire. But grandfather warned me, they lie. They only want one thing, to get out. July 20th, 1943. Found the Miller boy at the edge this morning. They had called too, him in his sleep. He would have jumped if I hadn't stopped him. The binding is definitely failing. God help me. I may have to do what Ezra suggests. July 25th, 1943. It is done. The binding holds for another generation. May God forgive me for what I fed to the guardians below. Guardians? I asked. Stone nodded grimly. That's what they call themselves. They say they guard the gate, but they're not guarding it to keep things out. They're guarding it to keep something in. Keep what in? I don't know. My grandfather never said, but he was terrified of it. That afternoon, I made the decision that changed everything. I'm going down into the gorge. Absolutely not, Stone said. People are missing. If they're down there, maybe they're still alive. They're not alive, Dr. Blackwood. Nothing that goes down there comes back alive. But I was stubborn. I'd come here to find the truth, and the truth was at the bottom of Hell's Gate. Marcus and Jenny agreed to help, despite Stone's protests. We had ropes, lights, cameras. What could go wrong? Everything. We rappelled down the gorge wall as the sun reached its peak. The smell got worse with every foot. By the time we were halfway down, my eyes were streaming tears. The rocks were covered with strange symbols, spirals and lines that hurt to look at directly. These markings, Marcus said. They're carved deep into the stone. This isn't natural weathering. Jenny was photographing everything. The patterns repeat, like instructions. We reached the bottom. The stone arch was even stranger up close. It was perfectly smooth, almost like glass, and it hummed with a low sound that I felt in my bones. The yellow pools were hot springs that smelled like sulfur and something else. Something rotten. There, Jenny said, pointing to the far side of the arch. Is that? It was a pile of clothes. 3 piles, actually. Men's clothes, women's clothes, children's clothes. all neatly folded, like someone had undressed very carefully. "The missing families," I whispered. Marcus was scanning the area with his instruments. "The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever this arch is, it's not made of normal stone." I walked closer to the arch. The humming got louder. And then I heard something that made my heart stop. Voices, coming from the other side of the arch. Not backwards Latin this time. English, clear English. "Help us," someone said. A woman's voice. "Please help us, we're trapped." "Elena, no," Marcus called. But I was already walking toward the arch. "We've been here so long," the voice continued. "So cold, so hungry. Please just step through. Help us come home." The arch began to glow with a soft, sickly light. And through it, like looking through dirty glass, I could see shapes moving. Human shapes, reaching toward me. That's when the guardians appeared. They rose from the yellow pools like smoke, becoming solid. Tall figures, maybe 8 feet high, with skin that looked burned and cracked. Their eyes glowed the same sickly light as the arch. When they opened their mouths, steam poured out. "You should not be here," one of them said. Its voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Marcus grabbed my arm. "Elena, we need to go, now." But the guardians were already surrounding us. They moved without making a sound, like shadows given form. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. "You seek the lost ones," another guardian said. "They called to you, yes? Promised you knowledge? Truth? Where are they?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where they belong. Where all who disturb the gate belong." Jenny was still taking pictures, even as her hands shook. "Elena, look at this." She showed me the camera screen. In the pictures, the guardians looked different, more solid, more real. And behind them, through the arch, I could see people. The missing families, reaching out desperately. "They're alive," I breathed. "No," the first guardian said. "They are beyond such simple concepts. They serve a greater purpose now." "What purpose?" The guardian smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "The door must be fed. The lock must hold. When the binding weakens, we require offerings." My blood went cold. "You've been killing people." "Not killing, transforming. They become part of the barrier. Their life force strengthens the lock." "What are you locking up?" All 3 guardians turned to look at the arch. For just a moment, their confidence flickered. Something that must never escape. Something that would turn your world to ash and madness. Marcus was checking his equipment with shaking hands. "The energy patterns are changing. Whatever that arch is, it's becoming more active." "The binding weakens," the second guardian confirmed. "Soon, we will require a new offering. Perhaps one of you." That's when Jenny screamed. Behind us, more guardians were rising from the pools. Dozens of them, all fixing their glowing eyes on us. The temperature kept dropping. Our breath came out in white clouds. "Run," I whispered. "Can't," Marcus said. He pointed up. The ropes we'd used to climb down were gone, cut by the look of the frayed ends. "The church," Jenny said. "Preacher Stone. He has to know a way out." But when we looked up toward the rim of the gorge, we could see a figure standing at the edge. Stone was there, but he wasn't calling down to help us. He was just watching. He knows, I realized. He knows what they do. The first guardian laughed, a sound like breaking bones. "The Stone family has served us faithfully for generations. Each one learns the truth eventually. The door must be fed, the lock must hold, and sometimes outsiders make the best offerings." "You're insane," I said. "We are practical. Your world believes it wants truth, knowledge, answers. But some truths are too dangerous. Some doors should never be opened. We have guarded this gate for 1,000 years." "Guarded it from what?" The arch pulsed with brighter light. Through it, I could see more clearly now. The missing families were there, but they were wrong. Their movements were jerky, puppet-like. And behind them, in the deeper darkness, something huge was moving. The first hunger, the Guardian whispered. The thing that devours realities. The reason your universe still exists is because we keep it locked away. Marcus's instruments started sparking. Elena, the electromagnetic field is destabilizing. Whatever that thing is, it's trying to break through. The binding fails, the second Guardian confirmed. Soon the door will open. Unless what? Unless we feed it fresh life force, strong life force from someone who truly understands what they sacrifice. The temperature dropped even more. Ice was forming on the rocks around the pools. My breath came in sharp puffs. You want us to die to keep that thing locked up, I said. We want you to choose. Sacrifice 3 lives to save billions. The mathematics are simple. Jenny was backing away toward the arch, still taking pictures. Elena, the camera shows something else. Look. The screen showed the Guardians, but also showed energy patterns around them. They were weaker near the arch, and the symbols carved into the rocks. They weren't just decorations. They were a pattern, a binding circle. The symbols, I said. They're part of the lock. Very good, the first Guardian said. The Stone family maintains the binding with blood and sacrifice, but the symbols must remain intact. Marcus understood immediately. He pulled out a small explosive device, something he used for geological surveys. Elena, if we disrupt the symbol pattern, the binding fails completely, the Guardian warned. The door opens. Your world dies. Or maybe you're lying, I said. Maybe the symbols are what keep the door closed, and you're just the jailers. The Guardian's expression changed. For the first time, it looked uncertain. Marcus, I said, do it. The explosion echoed through the gorge like thunder. Rocks fell from the walls. The symbol circle cracked in 3 places. The Guardians screamed, a sound like metal tearing. The arch pulsed wildly, and through it I could see the missing families more clearly. They were trying to speak, trying to warn us. The door, one of them managed to say. Don't open the door. That's when I realized we'd made a terrible mistake. The symbols weren't keeping the door closed. They were keeping the Guardians strong enough to guard it. As the binding circle cracked, the Guardians began to fade. Their solid forms became smoke again, drifting apart in the cold air. And the arch, the door, started to crack open wider. What have you done? The first Guardian whispered as it dissolved. 1,000 years. And you've doomed everything. Through the widening crack in the arch, something vast and hungry pressed against the barrier. The missing families weren't prisoners. They were part of the lock itself, their life force woven into the barrier to keep the first hunger contained. Elena! Marcus grabbed my arm. We have to get out of here. But there was nowhere to go. The gorge walls were too steep to climb without ropes. And above us, Preacher Stone was shouting something, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of reality tearing apart. The arch cracked wider. Whatever was on the other side was enormous. I caught glimpses of it through the opening. Something with too many eyes, too many mouths, something that hurt to look at directly. The first hunger. The thing that ate realities. The journal, Jenny said suddenly. Stone's grandfather's journal. It said fresh blood, a new binding. Maybe we can fix this. With what? I asked. The Guardians are gone. Not gone, Marcus said, pointing at the pools. Look. The Guardians were reforming, but slowly, weakly. The damaged symbol circle couldn't sustain them properly. They flickered like candle flames in the wind. Help us, the first Guardian pleaded. Restore the binding before it breaks through completely. How? Blood sacrifice, life force freely given, the old way. You want us to die. One of you, one life to restore the symbols, to strengthen the lock. I looked at Marcus and Jenny. They were scared, but they were brave too. Jenny was still taking pictures, documenting everything even as the world prepared to end. Marcus was trying to understand the energy patterns, looking for a scientific solution to a supernatural problem. These were good people. They didn't deserve to die because I'd been too stubborn to listen. I'll do it, I said. No, Jenny said immediately. This is my fault too. I was the one who saw the symbol pattern. It was my bomb, Marcus added. My choice to use it. The arch cracked wider. Something like a tentacle pushed through. Black, writhing, covered in eyes that looked in all directions at once. Where it touched the stone, the rock began to smoke and melt. Above us, Stone was rappelling down into the gorge. He had a rope, climbing gear, and something else, an old knife that gleamed with silver. The binding blade, he called down. My great-grandfather's knife. It can cut the life force free, weave it into the lock properly. One of us has to die? I asked as he reached the bottom. Stone's face was grim. Maybe not die, but change. Become part of the barrier, like the others. I looked through the arch at the missing families. They were conscious, aware, but trapped. Eternal guardians, feeding their life force into the lock to keep the first hunger contained. There has to be another way, Marcus said desperately. There is, Stone said quietly. All of you. All your life force, freely given. That would be enough to repair the binding permanently for another 1,000 years. Or, I asked, or we let it through. Let the first hunger loose. It will consume this reality in hours, then move on to the next and the next, until there's nothing left but emptiness. The tentacle was pushing further through the arch. More were following. The air itself was beginning to burn where they touched it. I could feel my sanity starting to fray, just looking at them. Elena, Jenny said, I need to tell you something. What? I lied about why I came here. I didn't want a good story. I wanted to find my brother. Your brother? Tommy Mills. He disappeared here 5 years ago, before the recent families. Stone never mentioned him because he was the last sacrifice. The one that's been keeping the binding stable until now. Through the arch, I could see a young man among the trapped souls. He looked like Jenny, same eyes, same stubborn expression. He was mouthing words. Save her. Save everyone. I can see him, I said softly. Jenny's eyes filled with tears. Is he okay? He's scared, but he's trying to be brave. Like you. The arch split completely open. The first hunger began pushing through, not just tentacles now, but something like a head, a mass of eyes and mouths that looked in every direction at once. Reality warped around it like heat waves. Choose, Stone said, holding out the binding blade. One, all, or let it through. I took the knife. It was warm in my hand, and I could feel power flowing through it. Old power, the kind that could cut more than just flesh. I choose, I said. But I didn't choose what they expected. Instead of cutting my own life force, I cut the binding that was holding the missing families. The blade sliced through the supernatural bonds like they were spider webs. Suddenly, the trapped souls were free. They poured out of the arch, not as solid people, but as pure life energy. 5 years of stored power from Jenny's brother, 2 years from the Johnson family, 1 year from the Hendersons, 3 months from the Millers. All that concentrated life force slammed back into the symbol circle like lightning finding a conductor. The damaged symbols blazed with white light. The cracks sealed. The binding circle became whole again, stronger than it had been in decades. The Guardians solidified instantly, more real and powerful than before. They grabbed the emerging tentacles of the first hunger and began forcing it back through the arch. Impossible, Stone whispered. The life force has to be freely given. This should have killed them permanently. It was freely given, I said, understanding finally. They chose to become part of the barrier to protect the world. The binding wasn't a prison. It was a choice they made. And now they've chosen to be free. The arch began to shrink. The first hunger let out a sound like a universe screaming, but it was being pushed back, locked away again. The tentacles withdrew. The terrible eyes closed. The missing families materialized around us. Solid, real, alive. Jenny ran to her brother and hugged him tight. The others looked around in confusion. "How long were we gone?" Mr. Johnson asked. 2 years, Stone said softly. It felt like minutes, like dreaming. The arch sealed completely. The guardians turned to us, and for the first time, they looked grateful. "You have done something new," the first guardian said. "In 1,000 years of binding, no one thought to free the willing sacrifice. The lock is stronger now. It will hold for many lifetimes." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you leave. All of you. The Stone family will continue to watch, but the binding is stable. The door is secure." Stone helped us climb out of the gorge. As we reached the top, I looked back. The guardians were fading into the yellow pools, returning to their eternal watch, but they seemed peaceful. We drove the missing families to the nearest hospital. They were weak, but unharmed. The doctors couldn't explain how people could survive for years without food or water. But they were alive, and that was what mattered. Jenny decided to stay in Kentucky for a means, while to be near her brother while he recovered. Marcus went back to his university, but he never published anything about Hell's Gate. Some knowledge, he said, was too dangerous to share. I went back to my old life, but I was different. I'd seen proof that the supernatural was real, but I'd also learned that some truths shouldn't be revealed. I stopped investigating hauntings. Instead, I became a regular therapist, helping people with normal problems. But sometimes, late at night, I still dream about Hell's Gate. In my dreams, I can hear the guardians singing, a low, wordless song that keeps the door locked and the world safe. And sometimes, in those dreams, I can see other doors, other gates, other places where reality wears thin and terrible things press against the barriers that keep them contained. I know now that there are people like the Stone family all over the world. Quiet guardians, watching over dangerous places, keeping ancient locks secure. Most of them will never be famous. No one will thank them. But they stand watch anyway because someone has to. Because some doors should never be opened. And because the things waiting on the other side are always hungry. My name is Elena Blackwood, and I used to think I was smart. Now I know that the smartest thing you can do sometimes is walk away from the truth. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved. But Hell's Gate taught me something else too. Even in the darkest places, people can choose to be heroes. The missing families chose to sacrifice themselves to protect the world. Stone's family chose to spend generations guarding a terrible secret. Jenny chose to risk everything to save her brother. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very careful, you can find a third option, a way to save everyone and still keep the monsters locked away. The binding holds, the door stays closed, the world continues to exist, and that's enough truth for anyone. Author's note: this story is fiction, but Hell's Gate Gorge is a real place in Kentucky. The local legends about it are quite different from this tale, and I encourage anyone interested to research the actual folklore of the region. Just remember, not all doors are meant to be opened. My name is Dr. Sarah Cross, and I study how people live when they're cut off from the world. I'm an anthropologist. I look at cultures and communities before they disappear forever. That's what brought me to Widow's Peak in September of 1988. The drive up the mountain took 3 hours from the university. My old Honda wheezed on the steep roads, past abandoned farms and rusted mailboxes. I counted 17 empty houses on the way up. Their windows stared at me like dead eyes. I was there because of a government grant. The state wanted someone to document the last mountain communities before they died out completely. Widow's Peak was perfect. A town that once had 800 people, now down to just 12. All of them over 60 years old. Well, all except one. Johnny Ray Hutchins had written back when I sent letters to the town. His handwriting was neat, careful. "Dr. Cross," he wrote, "we'd be happy to talk to you, but I should warn you, Strange things happen up here. Things you might not believe. I'd smiled when I read that. Every dying town had its ghost stories. It was part of what I studied, how isolated people created myths to explain their loneliness. The town sat in a bowl between three peaks. Main Street was mostly weeds now. A few houses had smoke coming from their chimneys, but most looked empty. The old church had a collapsed roof. The general store was boarded up. I parked in front of what used to be the post office. A young man came out to meet me. He had dark hair and serious eyes. Too serious for someone who looked barely old enough to drink. "Dr. Cross? I'm Johnny Ray." His handshake was firm. "Thanks for coming all this way. Thank you for agreeing to the interviews." I grabbed my tape recorder and notebooks from the car. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" He glanced at the sky. The sun was getting low behind the mountains. "Best we get you settled first. You can stay in the old boarding house. Mrs. Hollister keeps it clean." He paused. "Just when it gets dark, you might want to stay inside." "Why's that?" Johnny Ray looked uncomfortable. "The old folks, they have their ways, traditions. They don't like outsiders watching." I followed him down Main Street. The boarding house was a 3-story wooden building that creaked in the wind. An elderly woman with silver hair came out on the porch. She wore a faded dress and had the sharpest blue eyes I'd ever seen. "This is Granny Mae Hollister," Johnny Ray said. "She's lived here longest, 87 years. 89, she corrected. "Been here since I was born. My grandmother was here before that. Welcome, Dr. Cross. We don't get many visitors anymore." Her voice was soft but strong. She had the mountain accent but educated. These weren't simple country folk. "I appreciate you letting me stay." "Course, dear, though I wonder—" She looked at me carefully. "What exactly are you hoping to find here?" "I want to understand how your community survived when others didn't. What makes Widow's Peak special?" Something passed between Granny Mae and Johnny Ray, a look I couldn't quite read. "Oh, we're special all right," she said. "Been special for a long time. Come on, let's get you settled before dark." The boarding house room was simple but clean. Old furniture, handmade quilts, a window that looked out over the valley. I could see other houses scattered around, most with lights starting to come on. "Supper's at 6, Granny Mae said. "The others will want to meet you." After she left, I unpacked my things. From my window, I could see something interesting on the hill behind town. A circle of standing stones, maybe 8 feet tall. They looked old, really old. Older than anything that should be in these mountains. I made a note to ask about them. At 6, I went downstairs to the dining room. The other residents were already there. 11 elderly people, all watching me with curious eyes. Johnny Ray made introductions, but I could barely keep track of all the names. What struck me was how alert they all seemed. These weren't tired old folks waiting to die. They had energy, purpose. "So you're here to study us like bugs under a microscope?" asked a man named Homer, but he was smiling when he said it. "Not exactly. I'm interested in how communities adapt and survive. You've managed to keep going when other mountain towns have died out completely." "We have our reasons for staying," said a woman named Betty. "Responsibilities." "What kind of responsibilities?" The room got quiet. Everyone looked at their plates. Finally, Granny Mae spoke up. "Family obligations, old promises. Some things are more important than convenience." After dinner, I sat on the porch with Johnny Ray. The stars were coming out, brighter than I'd ever seen them. The air was crisp and clean. "It's beautiful up here," I said. "Yeah, it is." He was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Cross, why did you really come here?" "I told you, academic research." "No, I mean really. What are you running from?" That surprised me. "What makes you think I'm running from anything?" People don't usually come to places like this unless they're trying to get away from something or find something they lost. He was smarter than I'd given him credit for. "My divorce was finalized last month. My career's not going great. I guess I needed to prove I could do something meaningful." Johnny Ray nodded. "Fair enough. Just be careful what you find up here. Some things are better left alone." Before I could ask what he meant, he was walking away into the darkness. I went inside and tried to work on my notes, but I kept getting distracted by sounds outside. Footsteps on gravel, quiet voices. At one point I looked out my window and saw lights moving around those stone circles on the hill. The lights moved in patterns, like some kind of dance. I thought about getting my camera, but something stopped me. Johnny Ray's warning about traditions, about not watching. I went to bed instead, but it took a long time to fall asleep. Every time I started to drift off, I heard something. A sound like singing, but not quite. Like voices, but not quite human. Like something vast and patient, waiting in the darkness above. I woke up before dawn to the sound of footsteps outside my window. Slow, measured steps, like someone walking in formation. By the time I got to the window, the street was empty. At breakfast, everyone acted normal. They talked about the weather, about small repairs that needed doing around town. Nobody mentioned the lights on the hill. "I saw some interesting stone circles yesterday," I said. "Are those Native American?" The conversation stopped. Forks paused halfway to mouths. "Older than that," Granny May said finally. "Much older. They were here when the first settlers came. That's why this spot was chosen for the town." "Chosen by who?" "The families who founded Widow's Peak. They understood what this place was for." After breakfast, I asked Johnny Ray to show me around town. We walked past empty houses, past the collapsed church, up toward the stone circles. "How old are these really?" I asked, running my hand over the rough stone. "Nobody knows. But they're older than anything else around here. The Cherokee avoided this place, called it the watching ground." The circles were perfectly positioned. As I walked around them, I realized they were aligned with the mountains, with certain stars. Whoever built them knew astronomy. "Johnny Ray, what did your ancestors do here? I mean, why did they choose this particular spot?" He was quiet for a long time. "They were observers, record keepers. They had a job to do." "What kind of job?" "The kind you don't walk away from." That afternoon, I started my interviews. I set up my tape recorder in Granny May's parlor and talked to the residents one by one. Their stories were fascinating. Families that had been here for 6, 7, 8 generations. But every story had gaps. Things they wouldn't talk about. "My great-grandmother used to say we were chosen," said Betty. "Chosen to keep watch." "Watch for what?" "She never said exactly. But she taught me to read the star charts. How to mark the positions. How to signal when something changed." "Signal to who?" Betty just smiled and changed the subject. By evening, I was frustrated. Everyone was friendly, helpful, but they were hiding something important. After dinner, I decided to take a walk. The air was clear and the stars were incredible. I walked up toward the stone circles, hoping to think through what I'd learned. That's when I saw them. The 11 old residents were walking up the hill in single file. They moved slowly but with purpose, each carrying something. Candles, I thought, or small lanterns. I ducked behind a tree and watched. They arranged themselves around the stone circle in a perfect pattern. Each person stood at a specific spot, like they'd done this thousands of times before. They held up their lights, not candles, but something that glowed with a steady, cold light. Then they began to not sing exactly. It was more like humming, but with mathematical precision. Different tones that created harmony. The sound made my teeth ache. The lights in their hands grew brighter. The stone circles began to resonate. I could feel it in my bones, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from the earth itself. Above us, the stars grew brighter too. No, not brighter. Closer. I blinked hard, sure I was imagining things. But when I looked again, certain stars seemed to be moving, shifting position, getting larger. The humming from the circle got louder, more complex. The old people never moved, never broke formation. They stood like they were part of the stones themselves. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze, an answering hum, coming from above, from the stars themselves. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, because Johnny Ray appeared beside me like a ghost. "You shouldn't be watching this," he whispered. "What are they doing?" "Their job. The same job their families have done for 200 years. He took my arm, gentle but firm. "Come on. We need to go." "Johnny Ray, what's really happening here?" He stopped walking. In the starlight, his face looked years older than it had that morning. "You ever wonder why this place is called Widow's Peak? Why it was really chosen?" I shook my head. "Because it's the perfect observation point. Perfect for watching. Perfect for being watched." He looked up at the sky where the stars were slowly returning to their normal brightness. "My family's been here since the beginning. We're the last of the young ones. When I'm gone..." "When you're gone, what?" "Then there'll be nobody left to choose. And that's when the real watching begins." Back at the boarding house, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. I wrote down everything in my notebook, but the words looked crazy on paper. Old people humming at stones, stars moving in the sky. None of it made sense. But I knew what I'd seen. I also knew I had to find out more. The next morning, I cornered Granny May in the kitchen. "I saw the ceremony last night." She didn't deny it, just kept kneading her bread dough. "How long has it been going on?" "Since the town was founded in 1792. Before that, the Cherokee did something similar. Before them, others." She shaped the dough with practiced hands. "This place has always been special, always been watched." "Watched by who?" Granny May looked at me with those sharp blue eyes. "By those who were here first. By those who will be here last." She wiped flour from her hands. "Dr. Cross, you came here to study us. But maybe you should ask yourself, what if we weren't the ones meant to be studied?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if you coming here wasn't your idea? What if something wanted you to come, something that's been waiting for the right observer?" Before I could answer, she walked away, leaving me alone with a question that made my hands shake as I wrote it down. What if I hadn't found Widow's Peak? What if Widow's Peak had found me? I couldn't leave it alone. That night, I hid cameras around the stone circles, small ones, the kind I used for documenting cultural practices. If something was really happening up there, I was going to record it. The third night, I got my proof. When I developed the film, I saw things that shouldn't exist. The old people weren't alone in their ceremony. There were shapes around them, tall, impossible shapes that my eyes couldn't quite focus on. They looked like geometric patterns made of light and shadow, constantly shifting, never quite solid. And above them, the stars were definitely moving, forming patterns, configurations that hurt to look at. I showed the photos to Johnny Ray the next morning. His face went white. "You shouldn't have taken these." "Why? What are those things?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "They're the watchers, the ones who were here first." "Johnny Ray, please, I need to understand." He looked around to make sure we were alone. "My grandmother told me stories when I was little, about why our families really came here. They weren't just pioneers looking for land. They were recruited." "Recruited by who?" "By them, the watchers. They needed human observers. People who could record and report. People who could serve as contacts." "Contacts for what?" "For the great experiment." That afternoon, Johnny Ray took me to his grandmother's house, empty now, but still full of her things. In the attic, he showed me boxes of records, handwritten journals going back generations, charts tracking star positions, drawings of strange symbols, and photographs. Old ones, going back to the 1800s. They showed the same ceremonies, the same impossible shapes of light around the stone circles. "Every family had a job," Joet, Hanny Ray explained. "Some tracked celestial movements. Others recorded weather patterns, animal behaviors, population changes. All of it got reported during the ceremonies." "Reported to who?" "To the watchers. They're scientists, Dr. Cross, but not like you. They study on a scale we can barely understand. Whole worlds, whole species." I read through journal after journal. The entries were meticulous, scientific. Temperature recordings, star charts, notes about plant growth, animal migration, human birth and death rates, and every few pages, entries that made no sense. Coordinates that didn't match any earthly geography, dates that were impossible, references to the harvest and the selection and the final observation. Johnny Ray, what's going to happen to this place? The same thing that happens to all their observation posts, eventually. When they have enough data, they shut it down. What does that mean? He was quiet. Then, it means they don't need observers anymore. They become the observed. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept reading the journals, trying to understand the pattern. The earliest entries were full of excitement. The families felt chosen, special. They were part of something bigger than themselves. But as the years went on, the tone changed. The writers became more worried, more afraid. References to people going up to the stars and joining the great observation. The population numbers told the story. In 1800, Widow's Peak had 50 families. By 1850, 30 families. By 1900, 20. Now, 12 people and one young man who was supposed to carry on a tradition he didn't fully understand. I was starting to piece it together when I heard the footsteps outside again. But this time, they weren't going toward the stone circles. They were coming toward the boarding house. I looked out my window. The 11 old residents were walking across the street in formation, just like they did for their ceremonies. But their faces were different. Not peaceful like during the rituals. Sad. Determined. They were coming to see me. I met them on the porch. Granny May spoke for the group. "Dr. Cross, we need to talk." They filed into the parlor and arranged themselves in chairs like they were holding a meeting, which I realized they were. "You've been asking questions," said Homer. "Taking pictures, reading things you shouldn't read. I'm trying to understand what's happening here." "We know," said Betty. "That's the problem." Granny May leaned forward. "Child, you came here to study us, but you've attracted attention. The wrong kind of attention." "From who?" "From them, the Watchers. They've noticed you." A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? "It means they're interested in you, in what you represent." She sighed. "You see, Dr. Cross, we're not the only observation post. There are others all around the world, places where humans watch and record and report. But the posts are shrinking." "Why?" "Because the Watchers are getting ready for the final phase of their experiment. They don't need as many observers anymore. They're consolidating." "What's the final phase?" The old people looked at each other. Finally, Homer answered. "Integration. They're going to choose the best observers and take them, make them part of the watching. The rest become data points." "And you think they want me?" "We know they do," Granny May said. "You have the skills they need, scientific training, academic credentials, and you came here on your own, which means you're already being influenced." "Influenced how?" Johnny Ray appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, scared. "Dr. Cross, you need to see this." He led us outside. Above us, the stars were moving again, but not randomly this time. They were forming shapes, patterns, symbols, and they were spelling out something. My name. The stars spelled out Sarah Cross in letters of light across the night sky. Then they shifted, rearranged themselves, and spelled out something else. Ready for integration. I felt something change inside my head. A presence, vast and cold, touching my thoughts. "We have been watching you, Dr. Cross. You are exactly what we need." The voice wasn't heard so much as experienced. It came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking directly into my consciousness. "Your academic training, your observation skills, your isolation from human attachments. Perfect." "No," I whispered. "You sought to study the dying community. Instead, you will help us study the dying species." "I won't." Johnny Ray grabbed my arm. "Dr. Cross, don't fight it. It only makes it worse." But I could feel my will slipping away. The presence in my head was growing stronger, more insistent. It was showing me things, vast perspectives, cosmic viewpoints, the beauty of pure observation without the messy complications of emotion or attachment. Humanity looked different from that perspective. Small, temporary, irrelevant. Yes, you begin to understand. Sarah. Granny Mae's voice seemed to come from very far away. Sarah, listen to me. You still have a choice. No choice. Integration has begun. But Granny Mae stepped forward, and suddenly the presence in my head recoiled. I've been here longer than anyone, she said, speaking not to me but to the thing in the sky. 9 decades I've served faithfully. 9 decades of observations, of records, of ceremonies. That should count for something. The stars pulsed, considered. You are aged, obsolete. She is young, useful. Then take me instead. Let her go. She doesn't understand what she's getting into. Unacceptable. She has been selected. But Granny Mae was already walking toward the stone circles. Then you'll have to go through me first. The other residents followed her, all 11 of them, walking slowly but determinedly up the hill. Johnny Ray started after the but I grabbed his arm. What are they doing? Something they've never done before. They're breaking the contract. At the stone circles, the old people arranged themselves in their ceremonial positions. But this time was different. Instead of the cooperative humming, they began to sing. Really sing. Hymns, folk songs, lullabies, human music, emotional music. The response was immediate and terrible. The stars above us flared with angry light. The geometric shapes I'd photographed became visible to the naked eye. Towering forms of impossible mathematics, beings of pure observation and calculation. They loomed over the tiny human figures, like giants over ants. Cease. Return to protocol. But the singing continued, and with each note, each human voice raised in defiance, the presence in my head grew weaker. They're breaking the connection, Johnny Ray whispered. Breaking the link that's been here for 2 centuries. Unacceptable. Integration will proceed. One of the geometric forms reached down toward Granny Mae. Where it touched her, she began to fade, becoming transparent, mathematical. No! I ran toward the circle, but Johnny Ray held me back. You can't help them, but you can finish what they started. How? By choosing. By refusing to be observed. By staying human. I felt the presence return to my head, stronger now, desperate. Do not resist. Integration is gift, transcendence, freedom from human limitation. For a moment I was tempted. The cosmic perspective was seductive, to see the universe as the watchers saw it, vast and orderly and explicable, to be free of doubt, of emotion, of the messy complications of being human. But then I looked at the stone circles, where 11 old people were sacrificing themselves to give me a choice. I choose to stay human, I said. Impossible. You are selected. I choose to be flawed. I choose to be emotional. I choose to be limited and temporary and irrelevant. The presence fought back, trying to overwhelm my will with pure logic, pure observation. It showed me the beauty of mathematical truth, the elegance of cosmic perspective. But I held on to something it couldn't understand. The memory of Granny Mae's kind eyes, of Johnny Ray's worried smile, of old people choosing to sacrifice themselves for someone they barely knew. Human things, illogical things, valuable things. You will regret this choice. Maybe, but it's my choice to make. The geometric forms began to fade. The stars returned to their normal positions. The presence in my head retreated, but not completely. I could still feel it at the edges of my consciousness, waiting. In the stone circles, Only Johnny Ray and I remained standing. The 11 residents were gone, integrated into whatever vast observation network the watchers maintained. They had sacrificed themselves to break a contract 2 centuries old. "Is it over?" I asked. Johnny Ray looked up at the sky where the stars twinkled with what might have been malevolence. "No, they'll find another way, another place, other observers." "What about you?" "I'm the last of the bloodlines. When I die, Widow's Peak will be truly empty. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what the old folks wanted, to end it here." We walked back down to the boarding house in silence. The town felt different now. Not watched, just empty. I left Widow's Peak the next morning. Johnny Ray helped me pack my things into the Honda. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? At the university, I wrote my report. It was academic, careful, professional. I documented the decline of an isolated mountain community, the last traces of Appalachian folk culture, the inevitable victory of modernization over tradition. I never mentioned the watchers, but I kept copies of everything, the photographs that showed impossible beings, the journals with their careful records of cosmic observation, the evidence of something vast and patient and utterly inhuman studying us from the spaces between, and stars. Sometimes, late at night, I feel the presence at the edge of my thoughts, waiting, watching. The integration was interrupted, not canceled. I am still of interest to them. I've changed careers. I don't study isolated communities anymore. I teach undergraduate anthropology at a small college, and I make sure to stay surrounded by people. Lots of people. The watchers prefer their subjects isolated, vulnerable. 6 months after I left, I got a letter from the Postal Service. It was returned mail, a letter I'd sent to Johnny Ray. The stamp said, "Addressee unknown, town abandoned." I called the county office. They told me Widow's Peak had been empty for decades, completely abandoned. No record of recent residents. But I have my photographs, my recordings, my notebooks full of careful observations. Sometimes I wonder if the watchers got what they wanted after all. If by studying them, by documenting them, by carrying their story into the world, I became another kind of observer, another kind of recorder, another kind of servant to their vast, inhuman curiosity. The stars look different now. When I see them on clear nights, I can almost make out patterns, configurations, messages spelled out in celestial light. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I think I hear singing. Not human voices, but something vast and mathematical and utterly without mercy. The experiment continues. The watching goes on. And somewhere in the spaces between stars, beings of pure observation and calculation are choosing their next subjects, their next observers, their next collaborators in the great work of understanding everything, everyone, everywhere. I just hope they don't choose you. My name is Frank Morrison, and I wish I'd never heard of Gallows Hollow, Georgia. I've been a cop for 20 years, mostly working missing person cases in Atlanta. I thought I'd seen everything the world could throw at me. Dead bodies, drug dealers, kidnappers, the usual mess that comes with the job. But nothing prepared me for what I found in that little mountain town. It started with a pattern. 5 people, all from Atlanta, all disappeared during separate trips to the mountains up north. Different times, different reasons for going. Hiking, camping, visiting relatives. But they all vanished near the same place, Gallows Hollow. The local sheriff's department claimed they'd never heard of any missing persons. When I called to ask about it, Deputy Ruth Ann Cartwright was polite but firm. "No, sir, Detective Morrison. We haven't had any missing person reports this year." That didn't sit right with me. 5 people don't just vanish without someone looking for them. The first victim was Sarah Chen, a teacher who went camping alone. Her car was found at a trailhead, but she never came back. Then there was Marcus Williams, a businessman who took a weekend fishing trip. His family hadn't heard from him in 3 weeks. The others, Tom Bradley, Lisa Hayes, and old Henry Cooper, all had similar stories. They went to the mountains and never came home. What bothered me most was my captain's reaction when I brought it up. Frank, you're 6 months from retirement. Don't go stirring up trouble in some backwoods town. But I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was because my own father disappeared in those same mountains back in 1951 when I was just a kid. He'd gone hunting and never came back. I decided to drive up to Gallows Hollow myself. It was a Tuesday morning in late May when I loaded my car and headed north on Highway 75. The weather report said clear skies, but as I got deeper into the mountains, clouds started gathering. By the time I reached the turnoff for Gallows Hollow, a thick mist was rolling down from the peaks. That mist felt wrong. It moved too fast, too thick, like it had a mind of its own. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in just a few minutes. My radio started crackling with static and then went dead completely. The road into town was narrow and winding, with steep drops on both sides. Through the mist, I could make out the shapes of old buildings huddled together in the valley below. Everything looked gray and forgotten, like a place time had left behind. I'd been in plenty of small mountain towns before, but this one felt different. The air was heavy, pressing down on my chest. Birds weren't singing. Even my car engine seemed quieter, muffled by the thick fog. As I drove down Main Street looking for the sheriff's office, I noticed people watching me from their windows. Their faces were hard, unwelcoming. When I parked and got out of my car, the few people on the street quickly disappeared into stores and houses. The sheriff's office was in an old building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1940s. Inside, Deputy Ruth Ann Cartwright was sitting behind a metal desk, filling out paperwork. She was younger than I'd expected from her voice on the phone, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "Detective Morrison?" she asked, standing up. "Wasn't expecting you to drive all this way." "Sometimes you have to see things for yourself," I said, showing her my badge. "I'm here about those missing persons." Her face went cold. "Like I told you on the phone, we haven't had any reports. 5 people, all last seen in this area. Sarah Chen, Marcus Williams, Tom Bradley, Lisa Hayes, Henry Cooper. You're telling me none of those names ring a bell?" Ruth Ann glanced toward a closed door marked Sheriff. Then she lowered her voice. "Detective, there are things about this place you don't understand. Maybe it's better if you just head back to Atlanta." That's when I knew I was onto something big. Ruth Ann agreed to show me around town, but only after I promised to keep our conversation quiet. We walked down Main Street while she told me the history of Gallows Hollow. "This place has always been troubled," she said, looking over her shoulder. "Back in the 20s and 30s, there was a group of men who took the law into their own hands. They called themselves the Hollow Guard. We stopped in front of an old courthouse with boarded-up windows. They used to hold their trials here," Ruth Ann continued. "Except they weren't real trials. If someone was accused of a crime, especially if they were black or from outside town, the guard would drag them out to the hanging tree." "Hanging tree?" She pointed toward the woods at the edge of town. Through the mist, I could just make out a massive oak tree standing alone in a clearing. Even from a distance, it looked wrong. Too big, too dark, like a shadow against the gray sky. "Dozens of people died there," Ruth Ann said quietly. "Maybe more. The records were destroyed in a fire back in '52. Convenient accident, if you ask me." We walked toward the tree, and the temperature seemed to drop with every step. The mist got thicker, swirling around our legs like cold water. When we reached the clearing, I could see deep grooves in the oak's massive trunk, rope marks worn into the bark by years of hangings. "This is where they did it," Ruth Ann said. "Right here." I was taking pictures with my camera when I heard it. A creaking sound, like rope stretching under weight. But there was no rope in the tree, and no wind to move it. Ruth Ann grabbed my arm. "We need to go. Now!" As we hurried back toward town, I kept looking over my shoulder. The mist behind us was moving strangely, forming shapes that looked almost human. But every time I stopped to get a better look, there was nothing there. That evening, I checked into the only motel in town, a rundown place called the Mountain View Inn. The desk clerk, an old man with yellowed teeth, seemed nervous when I signed the register. You hear about the missing folks? He asked. What do you know about missing folks? He looked around to make sure no one was listening. People been disappearing from these parts for years. Usually outsiders, people who ask too many questions. He leaned closer. They say the mountain don't like strangers. I was tired and wanted to dismiss his words as small-town superstition. But that night, lying in the creaky motel bed, I kept thinking about the hanging tree and that creaking sound. Around 3 a.m, I woke up to the sound of my room door opening. I reached for my gun, but my hand was shaking. The room had gotten ice cold, so cold I could see my breath. A figure stood in the doorway, barely visible in the darkness. It was tall and thin, wearing what looked like old clothes from decades ago. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like a broken neck. "Who are you?" I whispered, but got no answer. The figure just stood there, swaying slightly, like it was hanging from an invisible rope. I fumbled for the light switch, and when the room lit up, the figure was gone. The door was closed and locked, just like I'd left it. But the room was still freezing cold, and there was a smell in the air, something like wet rope and old wood. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I called Ruth Ann and asked her to meet me at the diner for breakfast. She looked tired too, like she hadn't slept well either. "You saw something last night, didn't you?" she asked before I could say anything. "How did you know?" "Because I've been seeing them my whole life. The mist walkers, that's what my grandmother called them." She stirred her coffee with shaking hands. "They're the spirits of the people who were hanged. They come back when the mist is thick, looking for justice." "Ruth Ann, I don't believe in ghosts." "You will," she said grimly. "Because they're not done. Every few years, people disappear. Always outsiders, always people who get too close to the truth. The town council knows, but they keep it quiet. Tourism is the only thing keeping this place alive." I was about to argue with her when my phone rang. It was my captain back in Atlanta. "Frank, we found one of your missing persons, Marcus Williams. Hikers discovered his body this morning, hanging from a bridge about 10 miles south of where you are." My blood went cold. Hanging? Was it suicide? That's the weird part. There was a suicide note, but the handwriting doesn't match. And Frank, the coroner says he's been dead for weeks, but the body looks like he died yesterday. No decay, no animal damage. It's like something preserved him. I hung up and looked at Ruth Ann. She was staring at me with those sharp green eyes. "It's starting again," she whispered. "The mistwalkers are hunting." Ruth Ann drove me to where they found Marcus Williams. The bridge was old and narrow, spanning a deep ravine filled with thick fog. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, and I could see the broken branch where the rope had been tied. "The state police took the body," Ruth Ann said, "but they left this." She handed me a plastic evidence bag containing a piece of paper. The suicide note was written in neat handwriting. "I can't live with what my family did. The ghosts won't let me rest." "Marcus Williams was from Atlanta," I said. "His family never lived here." "That's what makes this so strange," Ruth Ann replied. "Unless—" She pulled out a small notebook and started flipping through pages. "I've been keeping track of the disappearances, trying to find a pattern. Look at this." She showed me a family tree she'd drawn, connecting names and dates. Marcus Williams' great-grandfather was named William Marcus. He lived here in the 1930s. He was one of the Hollow Guard. My hands started shaking as I stared at the paper. "You're saying the spirits are hunting down descendants of the men who killed them?" "It's the only thing that makes sense. Sarah Chen's great-uncle ran the general store back then. He helped the guard by identifying strangers who came to town. Tom Bradley's grandfather was the local judge who looked the other way. They're all connected." That afternoon, we drove to the town cemetery. Most of the graves were old and weathered, but in the back corner, we found something that made my stomach turn. A section of unmarked graves, dozens of them, all from the same time period, the 1920s and 1930s. "These are the victims," Ruth Ann said quietly, "buried without names, without markers. My grandmother told me stories about them. Good people, mostly. Men accused of theft or violence, but never given a real trial. As we walked between the graves, the mist started rolling in again. It came fast, too fast, like a living thing creeping across the ground. The temperature dropped, and I heard that creaking sound again, rope stretching under weight. "We need to leave," Ruth Ann said urgently. But it was too late. Shapes were forming in the mist around us. Tall, thin figures with their heads tilted at wrong angles. They moved without making a sound, gliding between the tombstones like they were floating. I drew my gun, but Ruth Ann grabbed my arm. "Bullets won't help," she whispered. "Just don't look directly at them." One of the figures drifted closer. I could see it more clearly now. A black man in overalls from the 1930s, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. His mouth was open like he was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then I heard it. Not words, but thoughts, somehow planted directly in my mind. Justice must have justice. More figures appeared, surrounding us. Men and women, old and young, all with broken necks, all reaching toward us with desperate hands. The cold was so intense that frost was forming on the tombstones. Ruth Ann grabbed my hand and pulled me toward a large monument in the center of the cemetery. "Holy ground," she gasped. "They can't follow us here." We huddled behind the monument while the spirits circled around us, never getting too close to the blessed stone. They stayed for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, the mist began to clear, and the figures faded away. "Why didn't they hurt us?" I asked, still shivering from the cold. Ruth Ann looked ashamed. "Because of me. My last name is Cartwright. My grandfather, Samuel Cartwright, was the leader of the Hollow Guard. He organized most of the hangings." She wiped tears from her eyes. "I'm one of them, a descendant. They want me dead, too." That night, back at the motel, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Ghosts were real. The dead were seeking revenge. And somehow, my own father's disappearance was connected to all of this. I called my aunt back in Atlanta, my father's sister, who might know more about our family history. "Aunt Helen, I need to ask you about Dad's family. Did we have any relatives who lived in North Georgia?" There was a long pause. "Frank, why are you asking about this now?" "It's important." Another pause. Then she sighed. "Your great-great-grandfather, Franklin Morrison, you were named after him. He moved to Georgia in the 1920s and became a sheriff up in the mountains. I always heard there was some kind of scandal, but the family never talked about it." My blood turned to ice. "What kind of scandal?" "I don't know the details. Something about people dying and your great-great-grandfather being involved. The family left Georgia and never went back. That's all I know." I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of the motel bed, my head in my hands. If my ancestor had been involved with the Hollow Guard, that meant the Mistwalkers were hunting me too. No wonder I'd felt drawn to investigate the disappearances. It wasn't just professional curiosity. It was personal. The spirits had been calling me here, just like they'd called the others. I was next on their list. The next morning, I found Ruth Ann at the sheriff's office. She was packing files into boxes, her hands shaking. "I'm leaving," she said without looking at me. "Tonight. I should have left years ago. Running won't help. They found Marcus Williams in Atlanta. Distance doesn't matter." She slammed a file drawer shut. "Then what do you suggest? Wait here for them to hang us both?" I'd been thinking about that all night. We give them what they want, justice. We expose the truth about what happened here. The town council will never allow it. They've been covering this up for 50 years. Tourism is all we have left. Then we go around them. I still have contacts in Atlanta media. We get the story out, force an official investigation. Ruth Ann shook her head. "You don't understand how deep this goes. Half the families in town are descendants of either the Guard members or their victims. It's not just about tourism. It's about survival." That's when Sheriff Powell walked in. He was a big man in his 60s with cold gray eyes that reminded me of a snake. "Detective Morrison," he said in a voice like gravel. "I hear you've been stirring up trouble. Just investigating some missing persons. Well, your investigation ends now. You're leaving town today, or we'll arrest you for trespassing." I stood up. "On what grounds?" Powell smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "This is a small town, detective. We don't need grounds." That evening I was packing my things at the motel when someone knocked on my door. It was Ruth Ann, carrying a large leather journal. "I've been thinking about what you said," she whispered, looking over her shoulder. "About justice. Maybe you're right." She handed me the journal. This belonged to my grandfather. I found it in our attic years ago. It's his record of the hangings, names, dates, reasons, everything the town has been trying to hide. I opened the journal and saw page after page of careful handwriting, names of victims, descriptions of their alleged crimes, details of their executions. It was a complete record of murder, written in the neat hand of a man who thought he was doing God's work. "There's something else," Ruth Ann said. "About your father. His name is in there." She flipped to a page near the back. There, in Samuel Cartwright's careful script, was an entry dated October 15th, 1951. "James Morrison came asking questions about the old days, said he was investigating disappearances for some newspaper up north. Had to be stopped. Franklin Morrison's blood, but gone soft. Took care of him at the hanging tree. Made it look like a hunting accident." My vision blurred. After all these years, I finally knew what had happened to my father. He'd been murdered for trying to expose the same truth I was uncovering now. "I'm sorry, Frank," Ruth Ann said softly. I closed the journal, my hands shaking with rage. "We're ending this tonight." "What do you mean?" "We're going to the hanging tree. We're going to face them directly and give them what they want, the truth and justice for what was done." Ruth Ann backed toward the door. "That's suicide. The tree is where they're strongest." "Maybe, but it's also where this has to end." As night fell, we drove to the edge of town and parked near the woods. The mist was already gathering, thicker than I'd ever seen it. We walked through the trees toward the clearing, following the beam of my flashlight. The hanging tree loomed ahead of us, massive and twisted against the dark sky. As we got closer, the mist began to swirl, forming shapes, dozens of them, more than I'd ever seen before. They surrounded us in a circle, their broken necks and reaching hands visible in the ghostly light. The cold was so intense that our breath came out in white puffs. I held up the journal. "I know what happened to her." "Hey," I called out. "I know your names, how you died, who killed you. I'm here to make it right." The spirits pressed closer, their mouths moving silently. Then I heard their voices in my mind, all speaking at once. "Justice, truth, remember us." "I will," I promised. "The world will know what was done to you." But then another voice cut through the chorus. A living voice, full of anger. "Drop the journal, detective." Sheriff Powell stepped out of the mist, pointing a shotgun at my chest. Behind him were 3 other men, all carrying weapons. "You should have left when I told you to," Powell said. "Now we'll have to clean up this mess the old-fashioned way." Ruth Ann stepped forward. "Uncle Billy, you don't have to do this." I stared at her in shock. Powell was her uncle? "Ruth Ann, you disappoint me," Powell said. "Your grandfather would be ashamed. The family business has always been protecting this town." "The family business is murder," she shot back. Powell raised the shotgun. "Same as it ever was." That's when the mist walkers struck. They came from all sides at once, their ghostly forms suddenly solid as ice. Powell's men screamed as invisible ropes tightened around their necks, lifting them off the ground. Powell himself fired his shotgun, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the spirits. I grabbed Ruth Ann's hand and ran toward the tree. Behind us, I could hear the men choking and gasping as the spirits enacted their revenge. When we reached the massive oak, I pressed the journal against its scarred trunk. "I promise you," I shouted to the spirits, "everyone will know the truth. Your names will be remembered." The mistwalkers stopped their attack and turned toward me. For a moment there was perfect silence. Then, one by one, they began to fade, not disappearing, but becoming peaceful, their twisted faces finally at rest. 3 months later, I was sitting in my Atlanta apartment, reading the newspaper. The headline read, "Georgetown's Dark Secret Exposed. Decades of cover-up revealed in historic lynching case." The article told the whole story: the Hollow Guard, the illegal hangings, the cover-up that lasted 50 years. Samuel Cartwright's journal had provided all the evidence needed for a full federal investigation. Gallows Hollow was in chaos. The mayor had resigned, half the town council was under investigation, and Sheriff Powell was in jail awaiting trial for murder. The descendants of the Hollow Guard were finally facing justice. But more importantly, the victims were finally being remembered. Each person named in the journal was getting a proper memorial, their stories told, their families notified. The unmarked graves in the cemetery now had headstones with names and dates. Ruth Ann had moved to Atlanta and was working as a victim's advocate. She stopped by my apartment sometimes, and we'd talk about what we'd been through. Neither of us liked to go into details about the supernatural parts. It was easier to focus on the human evil we'd exposed. The Mistwalkers hadn't been seen since that night at the hanging tree. According to the few remaining residents of Gallows Hollow, the mountain mist was different now, lighter, more natural. Whatever had been holding those spirits to the earth was finally broken. I'd retired from the police force and was thinking about writing a book about the whole experience. There were parts I'd probably leave out. The parts about ghosts and supernatural revenge, people wouldn't believe those anyway. But sometimes on foggy nights in Atlanta, I'd look out my window and see shapes in the mist. Not threatening shapes, peaceful ones, like people finally able to rest. My father's body was never found, but I knew the truth now. He'd died trying to expose the same evil that had nearly killed me. In a way, we'd finished his work together. The hanging tree still stands in Gallows Hollow, but it's different now. The town has turned it into a memorial with plaque, listing all the victims' names. Visitors come to pay their respects and learn about the history. I went back once, a year later, just to see how the place had changed. The tree looked smaller somehow, less threatening. Just an old oak tree where terrible things had happened, but where justice had finally been served. As I stood in the clearing, I felt a presence beside me, not frightening, but comforting, like someone was standing with me, grateful for what had been done. I left Gallows Hollow that day knowing I'd never have to go back. The dead were finally at peace, and the living were finally telling the truth. But I kept Samuel Cartwright's journal locked in a safe in my apartment. Evidence of what happens when good people do nothing, and what it costs to make things right. Sometimes the mist still calls to me, but it's different now. Not a cry for vengeance, but a whisper of thanks. The Mistwalkers are gone, but they're not forgotten. And that, I think, was all they ever wanted.